much time and without asking too much from you, all we ask is that, Father, may you preside over this meeting. Guide us, direct us, control us, and bring every aspect of this program to a successful conclusion. In that way, we will give glory, honor, and adoration into your mighty name. In Jesus' name we pray with thanksgiving. And all the saints say, Amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, diplomatic members of the diplomatic corps here, Nananum, Nime, Name, distinguished leaders from the august House of Parliament. I can see the presence of the running mates to the presidential candidate of the National Democratic Congress and party leaders and many other distinguished Ghanaians in the auditorium. In due course, we shall be acknowledging some personalities that are in our midst and definitely deserve to be acknowledged. At this point, I'd like to introduce to you the chairperson for this occasion. And I know he's a man who will not pardon me for wanting to make this very first quotation from Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson said, with the same views, the most honest men often form different considerations. I believe that is part of the reason this occasion is very important. It's spectacular in the sense that it will provide Parliament divergent views, different insights to even improve its operations. I believe also that the Speaker's Seminal lecture, which most likely will become a landmark and part of our programming in the country, will be very useful to all of us. Our chairman for this occasion is none other than Nana Kwabena Nketia V. He's a Omanhene of the Esikado, that's British Secondary traditional area. He's a sportsman and a committed Pan-Africanist. Now you know why I say he may not pardon me. And the founder of the Nana Kwabena Nketia IV Trust, a non-partisan and non-profit organization named after a hero of Ghana's independence struggle to champion African-centered development, African-centered governance, and articulate the integration of indigenous knowledge systems, among others. He's a well-decorated man with laurels and awards that time will not allow me to count. But he has served on a lot of boards at the national and community levels, including chairing the advisory board of the Water Aid Ghana, being deputy chair of Bisa Abrewa Museum, and also director of the Panafest, Pan-African Festival Foundation, Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum Governing Board, Volta River Authority, Sekandi Takrady Venue Organizing Committee of Cannes 2008, among various others. He is well known within international circles where he's delivered many lectures, including at universities. Nana has chaired a lot of conferences and award ceremonies, and also chaired a Deba on the culture and in honor of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and Nina Simone. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our chairman for this occasion, Nana Kwabena Nketia V. Mr. Chairman, Nana Chairman, we need to hear your remarks before we start.
The Right Honourable Speaker of Parliament, the Deputy, is that also Right Honourable? Right Honourable Speaker of Parliament. I've seen the majority, minority, all the leaders of Parliament. I'm not very good at protocol, so I was just telling the moderator I should have done all the protocols and I'd have stood on it. So, distinguished and honourable ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On the 10th of October 2020, I was very fortunate to be in Laura when the President of Ghana was commissioned the VRA's 6.5 megawatt solar energy plant. That was the very first time I heard Alban Sumana Kingsford Babin give a speech. Very brief, non-partisan, but it was filled with the wisdom of what the science of nation building and nationhood should be like. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, cynicism and wariness engulf me whenever I encounter a body of Africans wearing the tag of politicians, most especially of the partisan kind. Partisan spectacles usually provide a jaundiced view of the meaning of Africa and nationhood. And when centered in adversarial politics, becomes a quest for hegemonic relationships that energize social divisions, mutilates ideas of holistic development, create configurations of oppression, whilst promoting violence in tandem with a culture of sadism and death. But let me confess, I was really, really impressed and inspired by, I'll call him speaker later on, by Alban Sumana Kingsford Ask Babin's 10th October speech. That's a very humble and unimportant act. In the hope of encouraging that line of thought in Africa, I went over to him after the event and expressed my rather insignificant gratitude. Once I was sitting next to him, I said, "Do you remember that?" He says he doesn't remember. So it tells you how insignificant it was. Thereafter, I did a personal inquiry on Babin. Those who know him spoke about his integrity and sincerity. In keeping with our progressive development, now I use the word progressive in quotes, our well seems to be meandering into the veils of hypocrisy, and truth is gradually becoming rarefied. Therefore, these two Babin qualities, perhaps he has more, you would know better, have become exceptional in our existence. It will be sad if he loses or sells them, since times change and people change. But principles must always be adhered to and kept rigidly. A people are known as a people because of the principles they manifest. Babin's sincerity and integrity underlie my personal reason for honoring this invitation. But, ladies and gentlemen, one may humbly inquire if the principles or values manifested by the people who identify themselves as Ghanaians, what values do we find in the Ghanaian DNA? Are Ghanaian politicians or priests or parliamentarians or chiefs? For example, the models of Ghanaian values or principles? Please reflect on it. Thank you, Mr. Alban Babin, for reputed sincerity and integrity. I publicly thank you for that very inspiring and brilliant speech, which began with the end in mind. Nonetheless, I must also confess that I have wondered why I accepted to be here. Currently, I'm engaged in a hilarious but very absorbing research about Africa's marginalized indigenous institutions. I'm enwrapped by the marvelous wealth of my ancestral worldview, epistemology, and ontology, and revel in the magnificence of the all-embracing philosophy of Ubuntu. Therefore, it has been very difficult disengaging from that stream of consciousness and merging that with our current neo-colonial existence with a complementary deepening of our coloniality, which in itself is a stamp of cultural capitulation. Honorables, of course, through Western indoctrination systems, which some of us call education, we are now imbued with the wisdom of Eurocentrism. We have cheerfully discarded ancestral thought and knowledge systems. In the name of an undefined progress, we, the educated Africans, I hope I'm educated, are elevating our nationhood through the wisdom of ideologies or philosophies labeled as social democracy and liberal democracy. The House of Parliament has become the shrine for the ascertainment and worship of the social or liberal democratic gods as their faithful devotees espouse such philosophies. Ordinarily, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Parliament seems like a rubber stamp of the wishes of the partisan government in power. This reality brings the separation of powers into question. At this point, I must confess again my learning deficiency. I've seen someone like Okujetua Blakwa here, one of my young men. I have a disability in accepting that a partisan government can speak or act on behalf of all the people of Ghana. Perhaps, after this public confession, somebody like Joe Wise, Honorable Joe Wise, will find time to come and educate me, so that this troubling disability may stop. This acute partisanship seems to abhor voices of dissent. There seems to be a veneer of party fascism. It has been difficult to discern values, patriotism, shared value, and sense of common purpose. As a matter of fact, the House of Parliament appears to be devoid of a psychology of protecting Ghana. Ghana seems diminished. Interestingly, Kwekwanansi performances and tales have generated ominous amusement with regard to the rather thought-provoking split in the House of Parliament. This split has been a huge education on the nature or character of our House of Parliament and brought some understanding about the honor of the members of Parliament. They have invoked thoughts of Emil Durkheim's concept of anomy and what an analytical intellectual Chris Hedge defines as the state of rulelessness. The split has moved the House of Parliament into strange and stimulating futures, which also throw up more questions on the separation of powers as Parliament meets another body whose members are appointed by the sole prerogative of the President of the Republic of Ghana, the Supreme Court. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, it is rewarding to sit in the quiet of my village and remind oneself of the fact that, of the philosophy, and I'm quoting from the concept paper, the doctrine of separation of powers operates to divide the function of government among the three branches, executive, the legislature, and judiciary, which are separate and independent body. And this doctrine is usually credited to the great reasonable mind of Baron de Montesquieu. Montesquieu, for Africans, had a conviction, and you should never take this from your mind, the person on whose pillars you are standing on, that the peoples of Europe, in its esprit de loi, the peoples of Europe, having exterminated those of America, they had to make slaves of the people of Africa. in order to use them to clear all that land. The people in question are black from head to toe. They have such flat noses, like mine, that it is almost impossible to pity them. We cannot put it into our minds that God, who is a wise being, has put a soul, especially a good soul, in an all-black body. The person that we talk about, the foundation of. Entering the Supreme Court building of the Republic of Ghana provides insight as to the meaning of Ghana's motto, freedom and justice. Pictures of former chief justices from the colonial period to the present pompously adorn some rooms, smugly exhibiting continuity. The only difference is that the contemporary judges, to use Montesquieu again, are black from head to toe, and they have such flat noses. As a matter of fact, appearing in their crimson red robes and horsetail wigs, the ceremonial costumes of the Supreme Court justices are to the color and pageantry of parliamentary protocol whenever a head of state is giving his State of Nation address. It is quite picturesque. The costumes and the pictures could mistakenly be taken as outer exhibits of a mindset rooted in Europe, a subservient mindset articulating the oppressor's laws in the name of freedom. Definitely, they are the constant reminders of the primitive African society who were lesser breeds without law till in the late 19th century, when the civilized British, in their wisdom, introduced law into the Gold Coast colonies, pre-law epistemology, through the promulgation of the Supreme Court Ordinance of 1876. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, as one admires the robes and wigs, one discerns the philosophical depths of the Magna Carta and the petition for the Bill of Rights as the eminent judges sit in serene dignity when the one who appoints them addresses the nation in an usually rowdy House of Parliament. It is within this dynamic atmosphere that I've been fascinated by Alban Kingsford Babin, now wearing the title Right Honorable Speaker. It's a title whose equivalent I cannot find in Mfansi, in Ahanta, in Kusar, Dagari, or Gan. Enigmatically wearing various forms of attire. What has this speaker been trying to express through these clothes and cloths he wears? Has he also drunk the wine of single-minded narcissism and corn artistry, which usually intoxicates African leadership as they infantilize power and the power constructs? The African, the indigenous African, expresses the self in symbols. Esotericism can be neither written nor spoken, and hence cannot be betrayed. One must be prepared to grasp it, to see it, to hear it. Obviously, in spite of its very un-African title, the Right Honorable Speaker, Right Honorable Joe Wise, forgive me, you're not the speaker at the moment, wants to provoke deep thought with regard to his position and the future of the country. Thus, I was not surprised by the fact that he is initiating a discussion on parliamentary business and the Supreme Court, which delves into the separation of powers. After all, there's an opinion that a fool is one who does not know who he is and what he's doing here and where he's going, as John Mensah Saba enshrined. What most intrigued me about the topic was the factor of in perspective. In whose or what perspective? As a humble Nana and a little student of history, I have a sharp awareness that perception always carries problems. It throws up the whole array of illusion and delusion. It brings in the question of selection and bias. It raises the heritage and culture of indoctrination and definition. It stimulates the geography of thought. It rouses the factor of puppetry, i.e., who or what is pulling the strings and what may be described as a psychology of Pinocchio. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm confident that the Right Honorable Speaker was aware of Orunmila. You know, Orunmila is the Yoruba wise man like Socrates. His teaching was very simple. Wisdom is like a road that goes in different directions. Therefore, nobody can be its only and absolute custodian. For just as children are wise, so are adults. I believe that is why he brought us here today to talk. Using Orunmila's teachings again, remember that whoever taught you wisdom added a dose of foolishness. And that the wisdom of this year, or the folly of this year, is the wisdom of tomorrow. The wisdom of this year is the folly of tomorrow. Whatever perspective one takes in this discussion, it is my hope that the discussants, and I know all three of them, would not only focus on the procedural difficulties being encountered as a matter of process, but most importantly, address how those challenges affect the people who are supposed to be represented and whose interests Parliament and the judiciary are meant to protect. Whose interests Parliament and the judiciary are meant to protect and enhance within the framework of the motto, freedom and justice. In your deliberations, please do not forget that the presidency is not about the occupant, but the people. Parliament is not about the members, but about the people. And the judiciary is not about the members, but also about the people. With that understanding, Mr. Speaker, I feel exceptionally humbled by the fact that this seminal discussion, initiated by you, an African Speaker of Parliament, for an indigenous, marginalized African servant like me, to be requested to chair this occasion, under the guardianship of Nana Yame or Mawuso Bolisa, the ancestors who taught that when reason is stretched to the limit, folly becomes inevitable, and the treasuring of African values. I humbly accept this honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nana Chair. A round of applause once again for our chairman for this very important occasion. Please do keep in mind what I shared with you to commence, that with the same views, the most honest men often form different conclusions. It will make a lot more sense to you even before we are done with this important program. One of America's best, a former Deputy Attorney General of Pennsylvania, and who has now taught the law and has written copiously in voluminous books about the questioning of the doctrine of the political question. Professor Robert F. Nagel observes that the judiciary's power to invalidate the decisions of other institutions should be reserved for those special occasions when some aberrant governmental action is emphatically inconsistent with the constitutional theory, text, and public understanding as expressed in prolonged practice. I borrowed a quotation from Justice Anthony Yeboah of the High Court of Ghana, late recently, in his book, The Alchemy of Social Justice, when he discussed the political doctrine question, and he ended with this quotation as his conclusion, talking about judicial restraints. Ladies and gentlemen, on this note, we would like to hear from the leaders of Parliament. They will give us very brief remarks before we will take an interlude and hear from the Right Honorable Speaker, and then proceed to our keynote speaker as well as our distinguished discussants. I'll start by inviting the Honorable Minority Leader. And I've been at a dilemma as to understand why that title ought to be what it is, given the nature of the parliament we have. The Honorable Minority Leader, who is a lawyer by training, the Honorable Haruna Idrisu. Please, let's hear your brief remarks.
Something gratitude for those warm but straightforward introduction of Haruna Idrisu. Nana Chairman, Nana Nketia, Right Honorable Speaker Alban Bagbin, First Deputy Speaker, the Honorable Joseph Osei-Owusu, Deputy Leader, the whips and leadership and colleague members of Parliament. I see the National Chairman of the NDC, the Honorable Fuswan Pofo, and Professor Nana. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. You know, when they said I should come and make a remark, I was wondering whether I should not yield the floor to Deputy Leader Aveji, since I'm still before the Supreme Court in search for justice on a matter related to the relationship between Parliament and the judiciary. So I should admit that I am not the proper person to want to attempt to make a remark, because I'm still in danger of being cited for contempt or being sub judice to a matter pending before the Supreme Court. But I would hazard to make a comment, recognizing that the individuals that the Speaker have so chosen will do justice to the first seminal lecture on Parliament, its business, and the Supreme Court in perspective. I should commend Speaker Alban Bagbin for this initiative and trust that leadership and members of Parliament will support him to institutionalize this for all other speakers going into the future. I'm sure Right Honorable Speaker Bagbin is in search for answers to three fundamental questions, but knowing the resource persons, mine would be, as I have said, to guess. Probably, Right Honorable Speaker Bagbin is asking for an academic elucidation of this topic to understand the relationship between the three organs of states and the balance of power. And probably to ask the more important question, is there harmony? And how can there be harmony in service of the Ghanaian people? To this extent, I associate myself with this seminal lecture. Probably Right Honorable Bagbin and Parliament is also searching for answers to the question, where will you place Parliament in shaping the story on the coherent doctrine of separation of powers, in practice, in reality, and in doctrine? We look forward to the resource persons attempting to find answers to this. Should one organ of state interfere with the other organ of state? Probably we leave it to them. Our democracy is still young. If you look at what happened in the US in 1776 and what happened in France in 1791, But to paraphrase now Chairman Nana Nketia, partisanship. I've always said that Parliament must remain a forum where right and wrong are debated. But right must prevail, not partisanship. Regrettably, Nana, it is not so for our Parliament since 1993. Perhaps that is why we need to understand this dialogue in order to understand what are the limitations to the exercise of the powers vested in each organ of state. So, Nana, you know I'm still partisan. I will not be like the speaker. So I will end on a partisan note. When you have a majority walkout of 274 and numbers work out, and you are told that 138 cannot take a decision, and then you have another minority walkout of 136, and conspicuously known to you, 3 MPs are not there, whether it's mentioned as Ajua Safo or Jechikwesin or Kum at a clinic, then you are told that the decision was by a voice vote. How did the person in the clinic participate in the voice vote to arrive at that decision? Now, Chairman. So when you see us walk to the Supreme Court, we walk there seeking for justice, and that the predictability of the law is as important as the predictability of justice. That what was not right yesterday cannot be right today. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Minority Leader, Haruna Idrisu. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to acknowledge the following embassies that are fully represented in this auditorium: the Embassy of Algeria, Guinea, the Republic of Niger, the USA, Canadian High Commission, Iran, the Embassy of Israel, Switzerland, the State of Palestine, the British High Commission, Nigeria High Commission, the Embassy of Peru, the Embassy of Saudi Arabia, Kenyan High Commission, Embassy of Norway, Cote d'Ivoire, Morocco, Peru, Suriname, Qatar, Turkey, and France. Your Excellencies, the Speaker is very grateful that you made time out of your precious schedules to be here this afternoon and participate in this program. This program is live on GTV, the state broadcaster, and is also on Parliament's official Facebook page. Parliament's official Facebook page is also being carried live by a number of radio and television stations I will acknowledge in due course. This is the Speaker's Seminal lecture series. I understand that for some unavoidable reasons, the Majority Leader is not here present yet. We were going to take the remarks of the Majority Leader. He's not present yet. So we'll proceed. As and when he comes in, he will be able to speak to us. Shall we take an interlude from the Shebre Musical and Cultural Troupe? The Shebre Musical and Cultural Troupe. Shebre, are you ready? Thank you. Thank you very much, Shebre. A round of applause for Shebre. Shebre, that will be destiny. Thank you very much. This is the Speaker's Seminal lecture series under the theme Parliament, its business, and the Supreme Court in perspective. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the following persons in this auditorium. I'd like to acknowledge Professor Jane Nana Opoku Ajiman, 2020 NDC running mates. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the First Deputy Speaker, Joseph Osei Wusu. Thank you very much. Of course, we also have in our midst James Kluche Aveji, Deputy Minority Leader. We have Muntaka Mubarak, who is the Minority Chief Whip, and Ibrahim Ahmed, who is Deputy Minority Whip. We also have in our midst Nana Frimpoma, Chairperson of the CPP, and Mr. Samuel Ufosu Ampofo, Chairperson of the NDC. Thank you all so very much for making time to be here. We definitely are fully aware why we are here, but we are here under the invitation of the Speaker of Parliament, a man who has had an enduring and illustrious career in Parliament. After graduating from the University of Ghana, I happen to have been at the English department, and his name was told us. And after leaving the law school, he has told the world that he had retired and wanted to take a deserved rest. And circumstances meant that he had to be the Speaker of this Parliament, the 8th Parliament of the 4th Republic. Ladies and gentlemen, shall we welcome our guests to give us some remarks and tell us why we are here. The Right Honorable Alban Sumana Kingsford Bagwin.
Please kindly resume your seats. I could have just, with your kind audience, adopted the existing protocol, but being the person that is the cause of the presence of all of you, it's important, with your kind permission, for me to mention a few of the dignitaries, our senior men and women that are here. I know you've heard, seen, and I'm sure by this time you are trying to understand who our chairman of this occasion is. Nana Professor Kobina Nketia V, the Omahene of Esikado traditional area. The speech he gave definitely is more than food for thought. And many of the young ones might have been perceptions, the suspicions, the prejudices, and to confront the real issues that we have decided for ourselves, to be able to improve our governance, not to keep on talking about good governance, but to go into what we call smart governance that will see us through the current complexities of the world. And so they agreed to lead us in this conversation. And so I want you to applaud their efforts for accepting to do so. We also have a number of former members of parliament. Some are now national executives and representatives of political parties here. We also have representatives of civil society organizations. And definitely, we have our clerk to parliament, the officers of parliament and staff of parliament with us here. We invited, and I saw that a number of the members of the Trade Union Congress are here. And more importantly, the future of the country, even though they belong to the president, they are the future leaders of our country. The law students from the various legal education institutions are here in their numbers to listen to the wise counsel of not just the speakers, but the personalities that they are going to meet here and interact with. There are a few words of wisdom that they will take along that will lead them through their lives. And our umbilical cord as a parliament, umbilical partners, the media are here, and I'm extremely grateful you are here to cover us live. I just end by acknowledging everybody as distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and then I'll proceed to tell you a few words of why I think we should do this. But before going into that, let me say that it is my singular honor and privilege to warmly welcome you all on behalf of Parliament to this historic event, the Speaker's maiden seminar lecture. This maiden seminar lecture is aimed at furthering the conversation around strengthening our democratic institutions. Ghana's burgeoning democracy is a beacon in Africa and must be safeguarded by each and every one of us in a position of influence or in active service to the people of Ghana. Ghanaians must collectively make a conscious effort to renew our pledge and commitment to protect, preserve, deepen, consolidate, and entrench the democratic culture in the country. We have in our midst here a delegation from the National Assembly of Zambia who have paid a visit to the Parliament of Ghana. In fact, the Right Honorable Speaker of that Parliament just left a few days ago. And then we have another delegation from the same National Assembly with us. This time, mainly made up of the members of the opposition. They are here to learn and to share with us how Africa could go around all the challenges that we are faced with, some historic, some our own creation, and see how we could improve on the lives of ourselves and our people. And so this seminar lecture and those series that will follow, I think, should be taken more seriously. Let me say that since the coming into force of the 1992 Constitution, the three equal, separate, and coordinate arms of government have discharged their duties and responsibilities, albeit with some challenges, in accordance with the textual requirements of the Constitution. At the core of the Constitution is an underlying theme of separation of powers. This constitutional concept, developed by as we've been told, one of them, by John Locke, the English philosopher, and Baron de Montesquieu, his French counterpart, has been operational on the minds of Ghana's constitutional framers since the 1966 Constitutional Commission. The 1966 Constitutional Commission had, as part of its terms of reference, a provision, and I was happy Nana Chairman referred to it, to ensure the inclusion in the Constitution for Ghana of a provision which will guarantee that so far as is consistent with good government, the executive, legislative, and judicial powers of the state shall be exercised by 3 separate and independent organs. And those who know our history will know why this term of reference was put there. Other antecedent constitutional commissions or committee of experts have been similarly guided, and in this account, in fact, and this accounts for the operation of the doctrine under the current constitutional dispensation. Recent events, however, have cast doubt on our understanding and application of the nuances of the doctrine. The 8th Parliament of the 4th Republic of Ghana is like no other parliament we have seen in our history as a country. No other parliament we have seen before. The razor-thin majority caucus, mark my words, I said majority caucus, made a majority by just one person, enjoyed by the government party, the New Patriotic Party, as a result of the grace of the independent member of parliament for Femina and 2nd Deputy Speaker of Parliament. To do business with them has thrown up a lot of issues not previously seen under the tenure of other parliaments. This has been compounded by both the fact that the 1st and 2nd Deputy Speakers hails from the same majority caucus and party roots. To top it up, the Speaker of Parliament is a product and a nominee of the party not in control of the executive arm of government. More importantly, the active player in all this scenario, the Member of Parliament, described by Professor Stefan Lindbergh as, and I quote, a hybrid with mixed effects, unquote. The Member of Parliament in Ghana is unique. It's very different from any other Member of Parliament all over the world. And I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to travel all over the world and be part and parcel of many, many parliaments in the world. He's not only to serve his constituents who elected him, he's not only to serve his party. The most important matter is to serve his nation. How are you going to serve these 3 masters when the concept of the hybrid system that you adopted has not given any clear mandate to the MP? The many of the systems that you see work, there's clear mandate. You go as a trustee or delegate. A trustee of the people, and therefore you are working for and on behalf of the people. And all the time you have to bend over to listen to them to know what they want, what their hopes and aspirations are, and then use your capacity to make sure that you further that cause. That is the mandate operated by the Anglo-Saxon parliaments. The House of Commons had its bedrock from the imperative mandate. You go into the House of Commons representing your party. That is why the whip system is strong. So when the party says yes, you in the House of Commons cannot say no. They will deal with you. As one senior counsel said, when a member of parliament in Ghana reacted, he said, we will deal with him. I don't know how a senior lawyer practicing or not practicing or a member of the Council of State can deal with a member of parliament. But this country has experienced such things. So this is the hybrid we opted for ourselves. And it's not only the parliamentary system and the executive system. We immerse it into our traditional system or notion of governance. That is the hodgepodge in which we operate from. So admittedly, many of us who are not active political actors find it difficult to decipher the complexity of such a combination. No wonder Parliament has on some occasions not discharged itself creditably. This conduct has not been flattering on the country as a functional democracy. However, important steps have been and are being taken to ensure constructive ways of dialogue and consensus are pursued for the benefit of the common good. It is in this light that this lecture, dubbed the Speaker's Seminal Lecture, held under the auspices of my good office, is being organized to begin an honest, truthful, informed, and enlightened conversation. And this was one of the matters I used in searching for who could lead us in this conversation. Looking for people who actually be honest, truthful, candid to the country without fear or favor. And I'm happy to say we got these 3 gentlemen and a beautiful lady to lead us in the conversation. So the goal of today's lecture, the first in the series of many to come, is look at the concept of separation of powers, particularly the independence of Parliament and the applicability of the political question doctrine in Ghana's jurisprudence. We all know that this doctrine was started by the Supreme Court of the United States of America. They developed the political question doctrine to help resolve political questions and define the relationship between the judiciary and the other branches of government. This doctrine posits, and I'm sure the keynote address will look at that. This doctrine posits that there are certain questions of constitutional law that are constitutionally committed to the elected branches of government for resolution, other than the judiciary, which is appointed. Today's lecture will be delivered by one of Ghana's foremost legal academics and authority on constitutional matters. We introduce Professor Ernest Kofi Abuchi, a man I have admired from very far, even before he got to the UPSA. We know where he was, and he spoke his mind, very clear, very candid, and I must say, focusing on the interests of the nation. Fortunately, I have not been able to brand him what party he belongs to. We will also have no doubt give opportunity to the public, because the conversation will continue after here. But we are joined by some more key stakeholders who have also distinguished themselves eminently in both legal practice, governance, and academia. And it's worth noting that the event is chaired by another esteemed, as we've been told, not just an academician, not just a historian, but a revered custodian of our culture and tradition. And that's one of the places where our wealth as a country can be found. But unfortunately, because of what he talked about, the neo-colonialism, our mind is somewhere else, chasing the values of others, not our own. I am referring to no other person than the paramount chief of the Asikado traditional area. Asikado. You know, I'm from Sombo. In the Upper West region, and I'm actually a Dagara. Not what people say, Dagate, no. That is part of the colonization. The tribe is Dagara. Yes. So as an individual, I'm a Dagao. Okay? And collectively, we are Dagaba, not Dagabas. There's no S there. Another chairman, clearly the objectives of the lecture include stimulating public debate on the recent challenges in Parliament that are affecting parliamentary business. It is meant to also explore ways by which Parliament as an institution could rely on to internally resolve its challenges, to facilitate the execution of its constitutional mandate without external regulation. We've been directed by the Supreme Court to revise our standing orders. You can disagree with the Supreme Court, but you must comply and obey. And so we have to comply and obey. And say we need to do that with the people who put us there. What we are doing there is not our business. As we've been told, is the business of the people. So additionally, this is meant to create a platform for many more civil society professionals to further evaluate the role other stakeholders can play in supporting Parliament to excel in its provision of services to the people. Nana Chairman, it is my hope and expectation that this series of lectures will serve as a springboard to a marketplace of ideas and healthy national discourse. Such national discourse is essential to a cross-fertilization of our diversity and plurality of interests in our search to find workable solutions to issues facing Ghana's democracy. Again, these lectures will bolster the confidence of Ghanaians in our collective efforts in nation building, and a source of pride to see Parliament conduct its affairs in a manner that is consistent with our ever-evolving cultural, traditional, and democratic norms, ethics, values, and principles. I must say I'm looking forward to this lecture and the broader discussion that will ensue. I once more welcome you all to the maiden speaker seminar lecture, and I wish you an enjoyable and fruitful session. May the good Lord continue to be with us. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, the Right Honorable Speaker of the 8th Parliament of the 4th Republic. And thank you all so very much. Please, shall we put our hands together once again? And as suggested by the minority leader, it is hoped that the Speaker's Seminal lecture series will be institutionalized. We know that the Speaker has the Speaker's Forum, is that what it's called, that is held among the people. But at least if this could be included so that such array of scholars, intellectuals can also have the opportunity to share their views and ideas to enrich the practice of Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now get our loins, get ready to listen to our keynote speaker. When he's done, we have discussants who will spend 15 minutes each to also share their views with us. Once they are done, you ultimately have the opportunity to ask questions. You could make some contributions as well. Our speaker for today is the Dean of the UPSA Law School and an Associate Professor of Comparative Constitutional Law and International Law, the area of his PhD. Prior to his appointment, he was the immediate past Dean of the Gimpa Law School, a position he held for 6 years. He's a practicing lawyer, of course, and intellectual. He's a member of the Ghanaian Bar, of course, that's taken for granted. Having some 20 years up his sleeve. He is the chairman of the Ghana Forum of the African Bar Association, a group comprising practicing lawyers from across Africa, which I am proud to be a member. He had his master's law degree from the Harvard.
Nana Chairman, Nana Koblenkitia, Right Honorable Speaker of Parliament, Deputy Speakers, Leadership of the House, Majority and Minority, recognized, Honorable Members of Parliament, my Lords Justices of the Superior Courts and Lower Courts, Members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, never has the position of Speaker been so consequential in our body politic than that under the 8th Parliament of the 4th Republic. The wrangling leading up to the election of Speaker, an event post-dating that experience, reflects a certain feature of coming of age of an institution in the life of our legislature. The institution of this lecture, or the nascent institution of this lecture, is a further testament, Mr. Speaker, to the office of Speaker, and I'm honored to be the first to give this lecture. Thank you. At the entrance to the General Courts Complex in Accra stands the writing of judicial sanctity, equal justice under law. This ageless quote represents a warning to all those who seek favor with the courts without merit, but also an introspective exercise in self-counseling, that while vested with the authority to administer law, courts themselves and a healthy respect for interbranch relationship and authority has remained thorny in many countries for some time. Recent decisions of the Ghanaian court, the Ghanaian Apex Court, and open responses and feedback from persons and institutions of Parliament shows that the prospects of interbranch disharmony is certainly alive. The Speaker mentioned the fact that Parliament clearly has concerns. Much of Parliament's concerns have turned on the doctrine and principles of separation of powers and the boundaries for the exercise of judicial power. For advocates of judicial restraint in this vein argue that a doctrine of separation of powers as established under the Constitution necessarily constrains the Supreme Court in the extent to which it can exercise judicial power against other institutions in respect of the regulations of their businesses. Assertions of regulatory autonomy by the legislative branch against the judiciary is as old as constitutional governance itself and reflects the search for a principled relationship between the two entities in which the courts can be seen as respecting the operational integrity of Parliament without compromising its capacity to exercise judicial power. To the onlooker, this may sometimes look inconsequential in terms of the fact that the institutions of state are given to routine tensions. Given particularly the increasingly toxic political climate prevalent in the country today, decisions of the courts which impact political fortunes of the parties invariably tend to have cascading effects on other variables, and accordingly predicating these on broadly legitimate principles and boundaries of politics becomes crucial. Before going any further in this lecture, therefore, let's revisit some foundational principles of organic relationships in constitutional governance. In the structuring of a government, it would seem that Parliament is heavily invested with power and authority. The judiciary seems to be without power at all. From appointment through oversight, Parliament is empowered to be the centerpiece of Ghana's constitutional architecture. For example, Parliament vets major appointees of the executive and exacts accountability from all. Parliament controls the purse and can censure the executive and its officers. Parliament oversees our boundary delineation and superintends Ghana's electoral governance. The institution of Parliament levies taxation and as such is the authorizing entity for government revenue generation and spending, and this is capped by the powers and competencies to approve the annual budget of government. Its leading role in foreign policy is exemplified in its monopoly of legislation and the gatekeeping role of our treaties and other international instruments, including commercial transactions. Parliament's overall capacity to summon the executive to answer questions in its management dynamics of the country makes it truly the repository of power and authority in governance scheme under the Fourth Republic. It is therefore no overstatement of reality to say that Parliament is king of all its surveys, the notable exception being the Constitution and the normative order established under it. These enormous powers of Parliament have inspired a great deal of surprise in the minds of many who have watched over the years as the institution has evolved into something of a weaker sibling of the executive. So how did we get here? This question, while partly answered in the opening paragraphs of this lecture, is not the focus of this lecture, except to say at this stage that the peculiarities of the 8th Parliament has resulted in the upping of the internal stakes in Parliament, resulting in heated contestations of the institution's power blocks and influences. Should we be surprised or even worried about this development? For after all, unlike the executive, Parliament is fundamentally designed as a fragmented entity in operational terms, and this necessarily forces divisions on its work. The unique incidents surrounding the election of Speaker and the marginal numbers surrounding the distribution of majority and minority representations have ensured that the conflicts surrounding its internal governance have remained at an all-time high since the inauguration of the 8th Parliament of the Fourth Republic. Thus, Parliament's authority has inevitably, therefore, faced the querying jurisdiction of the courts. The judiciary's power to determine with finality contested claims has also meant that it has been the courts, not Parliament, not the executive, whose pronouncements have continued to shape the narrative and the evolution of governance in heated and contested cases in Ghana. Vesting the apex courts with this authority has been the subject of considerable disquiet, not only in Ghana, but throughout the history of liberal governance in the Western world in general, and also raised the question of the boundaries of judicial review as an important element in democratic governance and statecraft. Searching for principled justification for the power of constitutional courts have therefore dominated constitutional law, sometimes implicating thorny issues of legitimacy and the continued importance of the power of oversight of the courts over other entities. In seeking to explain the nagging issues away, various theories have been proffered, one of which has been to assert that the courts are the safest hands in which to vest power for settling legal and constitutional contests. Proponents of this school argue that the court's only power, if it can be called power at all, is the law. And in this vein, the courts merely play a vanguard role. That the courts have no policy preferences or opinions of their own, but the law. For respected constitutional scholars like Alexander Bacon, in his book titled The Least Dangerous Branch, the Supreme Court at the Bar of Politics, suggests, by that title, that the courts have a shield and not a sword, and that in the scheme of things evil, the judiciary is less dangerous than its more political cousins. In its engagement with other coordinate branches, the judiciary is merely defensive and not an organ capable of doing harm to anyone. So goes the argument. The implicit tenor of this position is that the other more political branches are not only dangerous when unruly and untamed, but that they often have incentives to do so. Mr. Chairman, in the United States, the history of judicial review and claims of judicial tyranny and interferences with the works of other branches resulted in the development of the political questions doctrine. Deployed in its simplest form, the political questions doctrine states that there is a domain of constitutional governance that is reserved to the exclusive preserve of the more politically oriented branches, and in respect of which the judiciary branch is precluded from making pronouncements of unconstitutionality. In other words, the political question doctrine consigns unto given branches the capacity to determine with finality issues affecting their own operations to the exclusion of the judiciary. Given the questions of democratic legitimacy surrounding the exercise of judicial review, the development of the doctrine has been seen as a compromise and an assurance against judicial interferences within domains deemed to be exclusive competencies of the other two political branches. The question: our Constitution consigns judicial power to the judiciary, and there are no definitions or boundaries. Does the political question doctrine apply in Ghana? In Baker and Carr, a United States decision, the court of that country outlined the key criteria necessary for the invocation of the political questions doctrine as follows. 1, the fact that a given department or branch has a textually demonstrable constitutional power to resolve a particular conflict. 2, where the cases involved require some policy determinations beyond judicial discretion. 3, where the determination of the matter would express a lack of respect for other coordinate branches. And 4, where some political decisions have been made which require unquestionable adherence from the court. Finally, 5, where judgments from the court will produce multiple embarrassments among the three branches. The development of this doctrine reflects the inevitability of inter-branch conflicts. Removing some issues out of the sphere of judicial determination was seen as a way of showing healthy respect for the democratic legitimacy and political branches while obviating the prospect of unnecessary conflicts on key issues impacting the work of the legislative and executive branches relative to the judiciary. Particularly in the case of the United States, where the doctrine originated, it is instructive to note that the dynamic of the political questions doctrine of judicial review reflects the perception of the United States courts having arrogated unto itself power to decide what the Constitution meant for itself and others, and the court's determination to accordingly engage in self-restraint by carving out areas of exclusivity by way of institutional competencies for the legislative and executive branches. The doctrine is therefore predicated on the horizontal separation of powers, which is defined by respect for coordinate authority and interbranch equality. It is noteworthy, therefore, that scholars identify two strands or variants of the doctrine. The classical doctrine rooted in the text of constitutionalism. Under this, the court's capacity to make pronouncements affecting the other branches is limited to matters permitted by the text. The other being the prudential doctrine, based on the court's own conception of its competence and inability to deal with mainstream issues of policy and politics. Courts applying the classical doctrine of political questions will only defer to the overriding authority of the political branches if and where they are convinced that a text or letter of the Constitution concerns a particular issue to the exclusive determination of these branches to the exclusion of the judiciary. Thus applied, the Supreme Court appears to have followed this path and been rather strict in its conception of the political questions doctrine. Its jurisprudence appears to have evolved, and while its decisions in cases like Kwachi versus Attorney General and the Ghana Lotto Operators Association versus National Lottery Authority, the National Lotteries case, may have generally established a presumption in favor of justiciability, the court's resounding pronouncement in the NPP versus NPP into brackets, the SIBA case versus Attorney General, generally adumbrated a preference for the political questions doctrine. In that case, the court was unequivocal when it asserted that the directive principles of state policy were essentially political statements of intent, which were meant to guide the government of the day in achieving the ideal values of the Constitution and were accordingly not justiciable, unless, of course, a party can specifically establish before the court that the provision is replicated or backed elsewhere in the Constitution. The jurisprudential revolution occurred in the National Lotteries case, in which the court replaced its earlier deferral of jurisdiction with a lower standard of proof of jurisdiction by holding that there exists a presumption of justiciability of the principles unless otherwise established. Nana Chair, while these shifts in the positions of justiciability mark the court's broad position on the specific issue of the political questions doctrine's pronouncement, or the political questions doctrine, pronouncements on the courts on the subject have at best been mixed, with the court's actual posture appearing to tilt towards a conditional acceptance and application of the doctrine. The political questions doctrine may offer, in the view of its proponent, a few advantages to the working of government. For some, it not only saves emergent or functional democracies the incessant conflict between various organs on the questions of decisional autonomy, but also helps preserve the specialty of functions of the traditional organs or branches of government. Commenting on the operations of the political questions doctrine in American constitutional jurisprudence, in his article, Institutional Lessons from the 2000 Presidential Elections, Garrett noted that when institutions must become involved in majoritarian political decisions such as the election of president, it may be better to rely largely on the political branches than the judiciary for several reasons. This allocation of decision-making authority is preferable of the greater democratic credentials of Congress. In addition, there is a less often recognized advantage of institutional design enjoyed by the legislature. The legislature can adopt procedural frameworks to shape decision-making and restrain partisan opportunism before a particular controversy arises. Ellipsis, others have defended the Supreme Court's repeated intervention into the election contest as a courageous move to save the country from crisis. Courageous because the justices adopted an aggressive role at some risk to the reputation of the institution and themselves. Such fears of a political disaster are overstated, and they reflect an elitist distrust of the relatively messy arena of politics. Congress will not have discharged its responsibility to determine any election contest without some amount of heated rhetoric, opportunistic behavior, and a partisan wrangling. However, Congress had the ability to apply in a transparent and accountable manner. Clearly, the fact that our Supreme Court's jurisdiction in the determination of electoral disputes is textually grounded implies that specific aspects of Garrett's concern relative to the determination of electoral disputes must be limited to the context of the American situation. The general principles of his position may, however, hold true for Ghana. For his concern reflects the age-old worries surrounding courts' dispositions in liberal democracies as chambers of interpretive omnipotence with a capacity to navigate the turbulent waters of politics. It is for that reason that one of the principles enunciated in Baker and Carr is that a court should declare an issue to be caught by the web of the political questions doctrine if there aren't judicially manageable standards for its determination. This specific leg of the doctrine is designed to guide courts in determining whether the texture of questions presented before them will force an evaluation of quintessentially political issues often lying in the belly of policy discretion or discretionary institutional practices. The reason for warding courts off the space of political questions, especially in a country as ours, in which the level of political toxicity is so high, is to ensure that the institution is not thrown into the vortex of high-stakes politics, in which the legal tools of managing the process are outweighed by the political polemics and wranglings. Indeed, the general view among constitutional scholars is that there are, on the other hand, adequate political tools or safeguards within the legislature and executive branches to deal with these issues in a manner that sometimes courts simply aren't structured. Consider the view of Bako, who, reflecting on the role of the United States Supreme Court in the presidential case submitted in 2000, noted in his article titled, quote, "More Supreme Than Court, the Fall of the Political Questions Doctrine and the Rise of Judicial Supremacy." Quote, "Taking the decisions away from the political process left little room for deliberation or protest. The court itself obviously recognized the importance of the case and the need for the public to have some access to the proceedings. The court permitted an unprecedented same-day audio rebroadcast of the oral argument and acknowledgement that there was a special need for transparency. The court was injecting itself into the democratic process in a way that it had not done before, and therefore special public access seemed necessary. But the public never heard the court's deliberations as it would have if Congress had resolved the controversy. Because the Supreme Court justices hold their terms for life, the people cannot express their discontent or satisfaction at the ballot box. At most, and unfortunately, the only political outlet is the next confirmation hearing," unquote. Like the quote before this, the claims of political disposition making the court ill-disposed to thrust itself into the fray of political disputes looms large, which is the reason why the political questions doctrine very often comes into play. The fact that these perspectives seem predicated on separation of powers also suggests the need for the special competence of the various organs to be respected relative to their work. Those of us in Ghana can especially relate to the author's opinion on the American Supreme Court's permission for the broadcasting of sittings in electoral disputes or electoral petition matters. It's like he suggests, the court implicitly reacting to the prospect of public complaints against any potential outcome of its decisions in this regard by heightening its own accountability and transparency systems through the rebroadcasting of the sitting. And what are the cost sides to removing certain important issues, such as the availability of quorum, loss of seats, internal parliamentary procedures, and the role and status of the Speaker from the political process, and making them subjects of definitive legal pronouncements? These positions support the broad view that a framework of government founded on majoritarian rule necessarily consigns some decisions to the exclusive determination of elected officials, and that the appointed character of judges' position makes them sometimes unsuitable. The US position, while instructive and holds a lot of lessons for our own evolving experience in Ghana, still needs to be looked at with context in mind. For starters, our court has the jurisdiction to consider and determine presidential petitions, a strength it enjoys over the American counterpart. For those who are students of American constitutional law will know that the American Supreme Court was never, at any point in time, given the power of judicial review. It took it. And this remains a constitutional contest that rages till today. Learning from lessons of countries like the United States, our framers put it there clearly in black and white that the Ghanaian Supreme Court has the power of judicial review. That, therefore, is not in context. It's not in contest. What is in contest is the boundary and whether or not there are circumstances where an institution's autonomy should be recognized and be classified as political, the matter classified as political for purposes of adjudication. So perhaps the time is ripe in this lecture to consider the approach adopted by the Supreme Court to the political questions doctrine. In Justice Abdullahi versus Attorney General, the court reiterated rather forcefully its standard position on the question of its mandate, namely, a universal jurisdiction to determine all matters involving alleged breaches of the Constitution. The court predicates its assertion on the distinctive supremacy of the Constitution, which subjects all there is in the realm to its regulatory influence. As Chief Justice Marshall did in the United States some 219 years ago in Marbury versus Madison, our apex court proceeds to assume jurisdiction, giving its mandate to intervene in all instances in which breaches of the Constitution are alleged. While its recent jurisprudence on the subject may appear rather emphatic in its subsidiarization of the political questions doctrine relative to its interpretive jurisdiction, the history of the court's application or treatment of the doctrine has been rather checkered. Justice Speaker, in his ruling in Amiru versus President Kofi, for example, dealt with the matter, and overall, in this particular context, the court appears to have adopted two approaches to the issue, namely, one of a total rejection or denunciation of the political questions doctrine in its relationship with the political branches, and secondly, what appears to be the one likely holding sway in the current jurisprudence of the courts, namely, the preliminary jurisdictional model under which the court will examine claims of jurisdictional exclusion founded on the doctrine of political questions first, before consigning any such matter to the determination of the political branches if it upholds same. In the NPP versus AG, the 31st December case, the court, by a slim margin of 4-5, rejected the applicability of the doctrine in Ghana and held rather categorically that the Constitution has vested the interpretive power in the court, which included the determination of the political questions. In so holding, Justice Adade went as far as to assert that, quote, the Constitution itself is essentially a political document. Almost every matter of interpretation or enforcement which may arise from it is bound to be political, or at least to have a political dimension. So conceived, political questions coming before the court were not considered complicated, any more than legal issues presented for the court's determination. Yet the scathing response from Chief Justice Archer on the subject in the same 31st December case is worthy of note, when he declared as follows, quote, the Constitution 1992 gives the judiciary power to interpret and enforce the Constitution. And I do not think that this independence enables the Supreme Court to do what it likes by undertaking excursions, or rather incursions, into territory reserved for Parliament and the executive. This court should not behave like an octopus, stretching its 8 tentacles here and there to grasp jurisdiction not constitutionally meant for it, unquote. The position of the majority and the response of the minority in 31st December may reflect the historical vicissitudes of the time, during which the Fourth Republic was in its infancy, and the need to shape the complex issues involving interbranch relationship demanded forceful clarity from the court. Yet the activist posture adopted by the court in 31st December had historical roots in the classic decision contained in Tufo and Attorney General, in which the court, speaking more than 40 years ago, stated in no uncertain terms that it will assume jurisdiction once a matter presented before it contained controversy. In his own words, Justice Sowa said, quote, once there is a controversy, a justiciable issue arose. Once there is a controversy, a justiciable issue we believe that under the wing of interpretation as contained under paragraph A of clause 1 of Article 118, the court has jurisdiction to entertain the issue. That suit involved a matter in which the purported rejection of the appointment of Chief Justice Apalu was put in issue, and the question of the justiciability of the challenge was raised. But more fundamentally, 2-4 established critical baselines and thresholds to guide and guard the relationship between Parliament and the court in the latter's exercise of its interpretive powers. This principle, which was stated by Justice Sowa in his judgment, has repeatedly been cited as a focal guide on the subject. In his words, A, the court can call in question a decision of Parliament, but the court cannot seek to extend their writ into what happens in Parliament. And B, the law and custom of Parliament is a distinct body of law, and as constitutional experts put it, unknown to the courts, unquote. While the language of political doctrine was not expressly used in the decision itself, the clarity and lucid presentation in Justice Sowa's judgment on the structural relationship that should subsist between the two organs within the context of the interpretive jurisdiction of the court remains convincing and has arguably endured the times. Yet, like its foreign counterpart in Baker versus Carr, the decision's theoretical simplicity is not matched by its practical deployment. Would matters pertaining to the election of Speaker or his deputies in Parliament be considered a matter that happens in Parliament and therefore unknown to the courts? Are the standing orders of Parliament, laws, and customs of Parliament beyond the jurisdiction of the courts? And would judicial determination on these matters be considered, therefore, an overreach on the part of the courts? These are no easy answers to these. It would seem that the 2-4 court was certainly mindful of the implications of granting Parliament full decisional autonomy, hence its qualifier that it is only happenings in Parliament that will not be questioned, and that decisions of the institution could be the subject of review. Therefore, while the soup is being cooked, there will be no questions, but the product, called the soup, can itself be questioned. And so, for example, while the processes by which Parliament takes decisions will be excluded under the ambit of 2-4, the outcome of those processes including laws ultimately passed or made, and that those processes could be the subject of appropriate challenges in court. Indeed, the operational independence of Parliament, in terms of devising and implementing its own rules, recognized in 2-4, was followed by the courts in J.H. Benson versus Attorney General, in which the court affirmed the fact that it will not dictate to Parliament how it goes about its business, about the approval process, so long as the constitutional mandate is respected by Parliament. The revolution in jurisprudence came in the case of the Ghana Bar Association versus Attorney General, famously called the Aban case, in which the court, by a majority decision, held that the doctrine of political questions applied in Ghana, and in arriving at the conclusion called in aid principles contained in Baker and Carr. Yet it is instructive that the language of Justice Viredu in this case, the language of Justice Viredu in his dissent in Aban reiterated the tone of the majority in 31st December and strongly suggests that the court ought to review claims submitted to it once those claims involved acts or omissions implicated by the Constitution. Given that the central issue in Aban was the validity of the appointment of Chief Justice Aban, the case indeed presented a scenario of mixed law and politics, and the split in the ranks of the justices in terms of their approaches was noteworthy. Thus far, one could be forgiven for thinking that the predominant position is that the doctrine of non-justiciable political question holds sway in Ghana, in Ghanaian constitutional jurisprudence, at least in terms of its preeminent application. The recent announcement by the court in the decision in the decision of Justice Abdullah versus Attorney General, however, changes the dynamic and reintroduces the court role in superintending the doctrine's general application in Ghana. A brief fact of the case is called for. Justice Abdullah turned on questions or the controversy surrounding what constitutes a quorum in Parliament for decision-making purposes, and further, whether deputy speakers of Parliament could count themselves in the determination of quorum for parliamentary business when acting as Speaker. The case arose from the refusal of Parliament to approve the budget presented by government. Having staged a walkout from Parliament in protest at the treatment of the Finance Minister as relayed in the facts of the case, reported case, or rather the facts of the case unreported, Parliament, through the minority, considered and proceeded to reject the budget of the government in the absence of the majority. When Parliament reconvened, the majority side invited the Deputy Speaker, who was presiding in the absence of the Speaker, to set aside the earlier decision by Parliament to reject the budget, as in their opinion there was no quorum when the said decision was taken. It being a case, they argued, that the minority only had 137 members and was short of the constitutional requirement for a quorum. In determining whether there was a quorum for Parliament to act in this regard, the Deputy Speaker, who was presiding in Parliament as in the absence of the Speaker, counted himself as part of the quorum. The represented budget and the action of Parliament in rejecting same was declared a nullity and the budget approved. The court primarily founded its jurisdiction on the rival and contested interpretations placed on the issue of quorum under Article 104 of the Constitution by stressing that there was a challenge which raised an issue of constitutionality. The Supreme Court's approach and the interpretation proffered is telling. First, the court recognized and conceded to the efficacy of the political question doctrine and its application in Ghana. But speaking through Justice Kolandi in a rather lucid and clear tone, the court reiterated its right to undertake a preliminary factual determination of objections founded on the political questions doctrine, a principle first enunciated in Kwachi and Attorney General, under which the court will invariably exercise jurisdiction over all contested claims before ceding jurisdiction to a coordinate branch or any other entity for that matter on the basis of an objection. In so concluding, the court admitted that Parliament is a master of its procedures and that it would not have intervened if the issues presented merely implicated the standing orders of the House without raising issues affecting the constitutionality of Parliament's actions. It is instructive that in seeking to assume jurisdiction, the court initially approached the issue from the angle of constitutional supremacy versus parliamentary, the question of constitutional supremacy versus parliamentary sovereignty. Admittedly, this conception has resulted in a rather interesting framing of the discussion surrounding the political questions doctrine. Without belaboring the point, however, I contribute to the conversation by stressing, with the most tremulous respect to the court, that while many a judicial and scholarly comment on the subject have stated the controversy in these binary terms, the political questions doctrine does not, in my very humble opinion, implicate issues of parliamentary sovereignty. It is understandable, however, why the court would like to dispel any such notions at the outset, given the misconceptions that characterize the question of who has determinative authority on questions affecting different organs, and in this case, the court wanted to forcefully clarify that. Otherwise, it is useful to state that the two concepts in fact operate on two different fields and planes. Whereas parliamentary sovereignty focuses on the autonomy of Parliament to regulate the realm, indeed, no other organ being higher than Parliament, the political questions doctrine claims by the institution to exercise a certain residual authority on a limited scope of subjects, as in this case, the internal procedures of Parliament. When carefully analyzed, one would even come to the conclusion that the two concepts of political questions and parliamentary sovereignty are fundamentally mutually exclusive, as institutions which enjoy parliamentary sovereignty, such as the legislature or the legislative body of the United Kingdom, do not even need to claim political questions simply because their matters cannot be questioned. It also explains why it is in the United States and not the United Kingdom that this doctrine originated. As in the case of the United States, the Congress of that country has to justify circumstances when it exercises exclusive power and competence over matters in respect of which the court should not have a questioning authority. And therefore, it also partly justifies why, in more than 1,000 years of its experience, the United Kingdom has not had any such issue arising, because as far as the UK is concerned, the parliament of that country enjoys parliamentary sovereignty. Justice Kolandi's reaffirmation of this position may have served to remind us, however, of the important fact that in Ghana, there is no operative parliamentary sovereignty, but constitutional supremacy. And the interpretive power of the court is the live wire of the Constitution. But the tone of the judgment also suggests that the court was concerned that the case presented implicated this confusion, and that challenges to its authority are partly inspired by this confusion. Whatever the concerns may, however, be, the judgment was unmistakable in its clarity on the place of the court's interpretive power relative to the foreign concept of parliamentary sovereignty. Yet, disposing of the issue of exercising a preliminary objection founded on the political questions doctrine is the easier part, it seems to me respectfully. For the more complicated subject is the question of determining the standard benchmarks for ascertaining political questions beyond the broad criteria contained in Baker and Carr to be applied in cases. Far from being academic, this aspect of the jurisprudence goes to the very roots of the skepticism defining the relationship between Parliament and the courts. The history of the court's jurisdiction the world over has been rooted in what can as best be described as interpretive jealousy, under which courts guard their jurisdiction rather jealously. Ceding portions through claims of political question would therefore not come automatically in the absence of settled criteria on the parameters of its application. What I'm urging here is a clarification of the two-step approach so clearly stated by Justice Kolandi in Abdullahi, which requires that any claim of jurisdictional exclusion arising on grounds of the political questions doctrine must first be subjected to the preliminary jurisdiction and determination of the court before same is consigned to the appropriate department or branch for the objection to be upheld. I guess the position here is that while it may be easy to raise an objection on grounds of the political questions doctrine, and while the courts may recognize the fact that a claim exists or otherwise, it is imperative that we have clarity on what constitutes these. This is all the more important because the history of the jurisdiction of the court has been grounded on the court's original jurisdiction being founded once there's a contest. And so all that the court needs to see is that there are rival and contested claims before it. A party saying there is an objection to jurisdiction, or rather a party saying there is an issue of constitutionality implicated, and another party simply saying there is no such case. And on the basis of that, that controversy would have activated the jurisdiction of the court. Demarcating the boundaries of the court's interpretive function relative to the political questions doctrine is utterly important in order to dispel suspicions surrounding its hegemony over the coordinate institutions in the realm. In other words, exercising as it does an exclusive capacity to determine the preliminary questions of whether a challenge presented implicates political questions, could evoke accusations bordering on institutional interest and a tendency for the court to claim a wider latitude for its own jurisdiction, partly based on the principles of interpretive jealousy, as earlier mentioned. On the other hand, predetermining the parameters of deciding the constitutive elements of political questions will not only inform potential challenges on the range of things to be considered, but also aid in the assurance for all in terms of the scope of the interpretive power of the court and the exception to that power contained under the doctrine of political questions. In doing this, it is important to remember that the court has stated that it will proceed to determine all suits in which it deems that an issue of constitutionality has been implicated. The first aspect of Justice Kolandi's two-step approach, stated in Justice Abdullahi versus AG, is a step which vests the court with preliminary jurisdiction to determine whether it has the power to assume jurisdiction in the first place. Within the context of the political questions doctrine, this is the most important of the two steps, as it allows the court to determine what even constitutes a case falling under the political questions. Clearly, the court's own evolving jurisdiction needs settling in this regard, and the need to reconcile the 31st December, the Aban case, and Justice Abdullah in this case cannot be overemphasized. Given that the court decided many years ago in the Kofi versus Kwashaidan that even where matters affecting the court are brought before the court, it is still the court that has to decide those matters. It is imperative that the court goes into an objective mode. And that objective mode with respect that is being urged is a conscious effort being made to spell out and itemize in clear tones and terms the circumstances for determining what constitutes a political question, so that there is clarity, so that the contestations and the post-decisional arguments that often follow court's decision in these cases shall be minimized. A development in that regard will stave off arguments and allegations that the scope of the court's intrusive powers undermines the principles of separation of powers. It will further deal with the conception of what is political as a binary to what is legal. Leaving the matter in the realm of shifting legal evolution, as it is at the moment, is problematic and could jeopardize interinstitutional cooperation. Clearly, the issues raised in Abdullah is correctly assessed by the court. Clearly, the issues raised in Abdullah, as correctly assessed by the court, respectfully implicates constitutional issues of parliamentary governance. But as argued by many, they also reflect on the questions that are quintessentially political. For the business of parliament turns on the representative essence of the institution, and it is both conceivable and the reality that the issues affecting its work, including the attendance at, participation in, and underrepresentation of constituents' interest through sheer lack of a member of parliament's interest or attendance in parliament, are things that often border on politics, yet they also contain legal implications. For many, this purely political issue should be left to the vagaries of majoritarian politics and the time-tested compromises within the political establishment. Definitely accepting the applicability of the doctrine and circumscribing its operation could therefore help reinforce Parliament's own internal political dynamics. For in the minimum, the institution has evolved and grown on the basis of political forces, majorities, political compromises, power brokerage between leadership of the House, and so on. It is submitted, therefore, that Justice Abdullah is, with the greatest respect, correctly decided to the extent that the court reserves the right to determine whether a given objection is well-founded. What it leaves open, however, respectfully, is the definitive criteria for ascertaining the claims founded on political questions. For the issue of the political question doctrine is going to come up again and again. For critics, this leaves Parliament tied to the apron strings of the court, as the former will have to constantly gaze into the abyss anytime the matter is brought before the court without a whiff of certainty on the standard benchmarks to be used in determining what constitutes political questions in given cases. Reconciling the three decisions of 31st December, Justice Abdullah and Aban will bring a great deal of certainty on the issue and reinforce the court's position on the applicability or otherwise and the dynamics of the political questions doctrine in Ghana. Be that as it may, there is a case to be made for a certain degree of deference to Parliament, and a litany of cases starting with 4 have all recognized and upheld that. Crafting and deploying that differential relationship within the context of the constitutional mandate of the court and the rule of law is what remains to be ascertained, and I'm confident the court will seize the opportunity when it next presents itself. I conclude this lecture by calling to mind the need to enliven and practice what Professor Lawrence Tribe calls the invisible Constitution. Before him, however, the framers of our Constitution long recognized the limits of the constitutional text when they inserted the spirit of the Constitution as an integral part of the text. There will always be twilight zones between the branches of government, and those twilight zones will reflect questions in the penumbral areas of the law, political questions. Arguably, questions over which coordinate branches may reserve internal autonomy over certain questions affecting their operations over which the judiciary cannot make overriding pronouncements may have to be resolved by recourse to rational pragmatism than hard law, perhaps. Reflecting on this truism, Robert H. Jackson, a distinguished American lawyer, who went on to become the prosecutor at the Special Tribunal at Nuremberg, prosecuting Nazi war criminals, noted, quote, "When the Supreme Court moved to Washington in 1800, it was provided with no books, which probably accounts for the high quality of early opinions. Jackson's sarcasm and skepticism may find support in Holmes' often cited assertion that the life of the law is not logic, but experience. The experience of the political doctrine questions in the court challenges the court to approach the subject, perhaps in the future, with a degree of pragmatism to reflect the complexity of our politics. The complexity of an institution called Parliament, which is very much fragmented, very much more often than it acts as a corporate entity in the body politic of Ghana. The experience of Parliament, which ensures that our politics, or which has ensured in many cases, or some will argue, that our politics has remained divided and very toxic. And that experience, which implies that the decisions of the court, however correct, may be the subject of political wranglings. The reality too, however, is that the court will not like to shirk or lose its Articles 2 and 130 jurisdiction, and therefore striking the appropriate balance between upholding the rule of law while respecting coordinate engagement with other branches. And it will truly be the litmus test for years to come in terms of the court's harmonization of our body politics. I'm sure many are expecting a very clear answer to the rightness or wrongness of things, and I'm sure many would have by now been disappointed by my lecture, and perhaps wondered what I have said so far. As I conclude and take my leave of the podium, since I've been notified of my time, I would just respectfully like to conclude by saying that the prevalence of the political questions doctrine still remains evolving in the scheme of our current jurisprudence. But it appears that the court clearly has recognized that, generally speaking, there is a scope in which Parliament has exclusive authority. This lecture has sought to just ask that in ensuring a certain degree of certainty moving forward, to avoid the political discussion that surrounds cases, it is imperative that perhaps we have a clear statement of the circumstances under which the court is going to uphold the political questions, the court is going to uphold objections founded on the political questions doctrine, to ensure that the conversations are removed from the realm of politics and placed on the pedestal of the rule of law. But more importantly, to also ensure that the key organs of state, namely the legislature and the executive, which complement the judiciary, can operate in a harmonious way. As earlier indicated by Alexander Bickel, as I quoted, the judiciary is seen as the least dangerous of the organs. And the reason for that is because the judiciary apparently has no position of its own. Its only position is that of the law. And on this basis, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Please keep acknowledging Professor Kofi Abuchi. The judiciary has a shield, but it does not have a sword. If that be the case, why are we where we are in respect of what agitates our mind today? Let's welcome Shebre for a minute of an interlude. Please do not go anywhere yet, because I can assure you that after Professor Abuchi, get ready for the 15-minute presentation by our panelists or discussants who will excite you even more. Shebre. We are live on GTV, and I must also acknowledge many radio stations that are carrying the speaker's Seminal lecture series live, and also television stations. I acknowledge Radio Gold, Radio XYZ, TV XYZ, and radio as well, Power FM. And of course, remember that this is also live on Parliament's official Facebook page.
Time for us to take you back to Parliament, where lawyer Thaddeus Sori is taking stands to speak at the maiden speakers forum, which is actually happening at the Accra International Conference Center. Earlier we told you it was happening in Parliament. We know that that's actually happening, as we do understand, at the Accra International Conference Center. So except on your screens right now, we're taking you there for you to listen in.
Parliament had power to vote. And the last one was whether or not the decision of the House on the 30th of November 2021 was taken by 138 members or otherwise, excluding the person who was presiding. The court categorically said that with regard to the first two issues, it was obvious that they were legal issues because different positions had been taken by the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker regarding the question whether or not a person other than the Speaker presiding could either be counted and also could either vote and also be counted. But with regard to the third question as to whether or not 138 members were in Parliament on that day, it was a delicate question, and that it would require a lot of caution for purposes of deciding whether to go into that matter or not. But at the end of the day, the court said the political doctrine question didn't apply in this country for three reasons. The first one was what was stated by the main speaker, which is that this country practices a constitutional supremacy rather than a parliamentary supremacy. Secondly, the court said that on the preponderance of the authorities, the doctrine didn't apply in this country. And thirdly, that our constitution is sui generis. Since I have 15 minutes, I'll deal with each of them. First of all, the question as to whether the political question doctrine applies in any democracy does not depend on whether it's a constitutional or parliamentary democracy. It applies in both. Because in our under our constitution, the courts have repeatedly said that, first of all, it must also exercise restraint with regard to interfering in matters that belong to other branches. The courts have repeatedly said that. In Abu Ramadan and Attorney General Badibe made it clear that if the exercise of a specific discretion is within the remit of a particular branch, the courts must not interfere. Otherwise, they will be putting themselves in the position of that branch and exercising that discretion. So it doesn't depend on that. even in England, there's the old case of Blackburn and Attorney General, in which two of the judges, Lord Salmon and Lord Denning, made it clear that in certain specific instances, they would question an act of Parliament, regarding whether Parliament properly exercised its power in a particular matter or not. It was within the province of the courts to question it. And so it doesn't depend. So the first reason given by the court for saying the political question doctrine doesn't apply in this country cannot be correct. It does not depend on whether it is a constitutional system of governance or a parliamentary system of governance. That's not the question. Then we also look at the court's conclusion that on the preponderance of the authorities, and I want to go through some of the authorities that the main speaker has gone through. Now, in the first or the earliest case he referred to was a case of Tufo and Attorney General. In the subsequent cases of Ghana Bar Association, and that's the 31st December case, and Amidu and Attorney General, Pega JSC, and then Hebron Benjamin said it categorically that the Tufo decision applied the political question doctrine, although they didn't refer to it. Then we move on from the Tufo case to the case of NPP versus Attorney General. That's the 31st December case. That is the case in which it was split. And the question was whether 31st December was rightly celebrated as constitutional or otherwise. 5-4 decision, because the minority thought that, well, whether we celebrate 31st December or not, it's a matter for one government to decide as against the other. And the court took the view that no, the political doctrine, the political question doctrine doesn't apply. But then we fast forward to Ghana Bar Association versus Attorney General. Ghana Bar Association categorically denounced the NPP decision and said that the political question doctrine applied in Ghana. From the Urban case, which is a Ghana Bar Association case, we get to J.H. Mensah. In J.H. Mensah, you find judges like Akins, who although said that the doctrine is gradually finding its way into the country. Akins said it was gradually finding its way in the country, which meant that the court was beginning to accept the fact that the doctrine was gradually finding its way into the country, and correctly applied the doctrine again there. So although those statements were made, always watch the conclusion of the court. They make that statement, but they nevertheless apply the doctrine. So in that case, the question as to whether retained ministers ought to go through a particular parliamentary process or not, the court said, go back to Parliament and decide it. It's not our business to decide. Then we get to Amidu versus Attorney General. In Amidu versus Attorney General, the question was whether or not certain appointments ought to have been done in consultation with the Council of State or not. The court took the view, again, categorically the political question doctrine applies. Several decisions followed that one. And my learned senior, Dr. Yini, is here. There's a case that I did for him in the Supreme Court, Seppel versus Attorney General, in which we challenged the Master Facility Agreement. The Supreme Court, whilst making those statements, general statements again, that the doctrine doesn't apply, said no. There are certain matters that are for the executive and the legislature to determine. So we would not determine that question. In fact, in that particular case, Datiba makes very interesting observations. He even says that there are some of the matters that should not even be left to the legislature or the executive to determine. We should even leave it to the public, to the electorate, to determine whether to vote them back into power for doing certain things or not. That it is not for the judiciary to determine it. There has been such consistency in the application of the doctrine such that I can't say there's any ambivalence. It is the statements that the court makes and the conclusion they reach that gives us that impression. So again, on the preponderance of the authorities, it is clear that in Ghana, the doctrine applies. But, so let me deal with the third point. The third point is that our constitution is sui generis. So it's special and unique to us. So we shouldn't allow certain notions to influence our understanding of certain things that come to them for determination. I disagree with that position. The idea of a constitution itself is not sui generis. The constitution is founded on principles that are not sui generis. Our constitutional training is not sui generis. So if a matter comes before the court, unless the court can demonstrate how unique that is to Ghana, we cannot ignore other examples from which we have gone and borrowed their governance systems and say, no, the constitution is sui generis. So let's look at it this way. Let's show why it is unique. So on the three bases upon which the court reached that conclusion, that is where I depart from them. But the conclusion of the court that yes, the issues before the court presented legal issues for determination by the court, I agree with it. Because if there's a difference in the House as to whether or not the Constitution allows a particular, a deputy speaker or other member of parliament presiding a voting right or otherwise, if there's a different opinion, the question is, then let's read Articles 102 and 104 and determine whether or not it allows that. So the main speaker rightly identifies it, and for me, it is not that complicated. The two-way test that you identified naturally must involve the court. A matter comes before the court. The court cannot, without listening to the case and without examining the issues, decide that it involves a political question doctrine. The court must first of all decide, well, what are the facts? And then decide from the two-way test that is this a matter properly belonging to a particular arm of government to determine? Is this a matter properly belonging to Parliament to determine? Is it properly belonging to the executive to determine? If the answer is yes, then it scales it up to the next level. Okay, if it is within the power of the legislature or the executive to determine, the next thing that follows is, has that branch exceeded the parameters of the Constitution? What was prescribed in the Constitution in respect of how they should exercise that power? Have they followed it? If the answer is yes, then the rest of it is political, because now you want to carry it outside their discretion and determine it as a discretion, as a matter within judicial discretion. So it is not as complicated. And for me, it is how people read the matter and cause the courts and all of us to respond to the manner in which they interpret the facts that come before the court. Oh, this matter, the NDC is interested, or the MPP is interested, or it's a political matter. The question is, what is the legal issue surrounding it? If the court frames the issue in a legal manner and determines it legally, nobody would have an issue. So the Kuleni decision was categorical and it was clear. With regard to the third issue, the court was very, very clear, and for me that is what is impressive about it. That the question is whether there were 138 members in Parliament. That matter, there is a small problem there, and the court said, look, we would be very cautious if that were the only issue, because we are not going to go into Parliament. And my good friend, the minority leader, maybe I'm giving you an answer to one of the questions that you asked here, but I'm sure you can relate to it. The court would not come into Parliament and count the number of individuals there. But if there's a legal question that arises from the number of people, it has to decide that. So it's been consistent. Before it was consistent. J.H. Mensah was consistent. And in this particular instance, the court would very easily have ceded that point to Parliament if another legal issue didn't arise relating to the number of people that were there. So if you read the decision, the court made it clear that we would have stayed off this one, but there are other legal issues that flowed from it. So insofar as that decision is concerned, I don't see the difficulty that it raises insofar as the relationship between Parliament and the judiciary is concerned, because the court acknowledged, even though it said categorically that the doctrine doesn't apply, the court acknowledged the doctrine in so many ways that it cannot be said that it had departed from a previous position. Even the authorities it cited only 3 authorities. The first one was the NPP case, which was discredited in 31st December, and it was not followed in subsequent decisions. And the recent decision in Seminal versus Attorney General shows clearly that the doctrine is respected. So the Justice Abdullahi decision did not depart from it, although it said that. Now, I think I should also concede the point that to the extent that on so many occasions issues of politics arise, and for which reason the courts must decide those points, and political undertones are read into it, people would always say, well, this thing is a political matter. And a political matter doesn't mean that it doesn't raise legal issues. So we must all be quick to show where the legal issues are that the court is required to determine, and what the court cannot determine because it's a matter within the province of Parliament to determine. Parliament is exercising its powers within the remit of the law, and for which reason there is the court ought not to interfere. There have been other tests that have also been formulated, and the Speaker made mention of that the court must also consider whether the issue involves resolution of questions committed by the text of the Constitution. I think I've mentioned that. And would a resolution of the question demand that a court move beyond the areas of judicial expertise? So, if the court is not required to determine a matter of law properly, so to speak, and in the case that I did for Dr. Yine, the question was whether the agreement was beneficial to the country or not, because we had taken the view that part of it favored China rather than Ghana. And the court said, well, it's not for us to determine whether it favors Ghana or otherwise. Go back to the electorate will determine its impact on their lives and decide whether to vote them in or not. So, insofar as, to wind up my point, since I don't have too much time, I will acknowledge the fact that there will be many occasions on which a question arises as to whether or not this matter is a political case, and that is distinguishable from a case raising a political question. If you say the actors are political, the fact that two politicians are embroiled in a tussle in court, does it make it does it raise a political question? No, they are legal questions they seek to resolve in the court. So the political doctrine question, which I must emphasize, is rooted basically on the doctrine of separation of powers. The main speaker has said so, the speaker has said so. And so if the political question doctrine is rooted in separation of powers, there can be no statement whatsoever coming from anybody, I mean, any constitutional lawyer, that that the political question doctrine doesn't apply in Ghana. If you say it doesn't apply in Ghana, then it means that the whole doctrine of separation of powers doesn't apply. But if we concede that the concept of separation of powers applies, the political question doctrine is derived from that one. It is essentially a principle of judicial restraint developed by the courts themselves to refrain from deciding matters that are exclusively within the province of another branch of government. And so, to that extent, the court would always has developed not only the concept of the political question doctrine, there's also the concept of mootness. It's in the nature of a political question. It is moot because we don't have to determine that matter. There's also the concept of ripeness. Those are all principles of judicial restraint rooted in the doctrine of separation of powers. So to the extent that it is separation of powers is part of our constitutional law, it cannot be argued anyway that the political question doctrine doesn't apply. So it clearly applies, and that is my position. I will wind up by referring to the views of Justice then John Marshall of the United States Representatives when he delivered a lecture. He said this of the political question. He says, by extending the judicial power in all cases in law and equity, the Constitution had never been understood to confer on that department any political power whatever. To come within this department, a question must assume a legal form for forensic litigation and judicial decision. So the emphasis again is that the case must raise a legal question. So if we formulate it in terms of political issues, how the NDC, when it was the NDC, we did this, you did that. When it was the MPP, it was this other way. Those are not legal questions. You can deal with that in history. But the question is, what the NDC government has done, does the Constitution allow it or not? If the Constitution allows it, have they done it in the manner in which the Constitution has prescribed? If the answer is yes, it's a political question. It's not for the judiciary to wade in. Commenting on what Justice Marshall said, a learned writer responded to Justice Marshall. He said, Marshall knew that the court handled political issues. So it is not as if when a matter comes before the court, there will be no political implications. Of course, if they decide that the e-levy should be applied or should not be applied, it will have political consequences. The question is, what are the legal issues surrounding the implementation of e-levy? If the court decides it strictly within that remit, it is within its remit to decide that question. But how the MPP government will react to it or how the NDC will see it, and after the decision, we realize that it looked like the House was able to find out which part favored the NDC and which part favored the NPP. It was not a question as to, has the law been correctly applied by the Supreme Court? And so if we begin to see it in those perspectives, that is how we would always view it. But this is what the learned writer said. He said, Marshall knew that the court handled political issues. Anyone who would deny this is foolish. But Marshall also realized that the handling of such issues by the court is not a political one, but a legal one. What Marshall meant by this was that the court cannot act in a political way. The court can and must handle questions of public policy, political questions and others, but it cannot handle the question in the way of politics, but in the way of the law. The entire question must be changed into a legal question. So at every point in time, if the court is acting within its remit and deciding the question legally, you cannot invoke the political question doctrine to stop the court from inquiring into that matter. But if you can show the court that the matter is within the province of the executive or the legislature, and that the power is being exercised within that remit, the court will not interfere. So in summary, I take the view that the Justice Abdullahi decision did not depart from the application, it did not state any law different from the fact that the political question doctrine is part of our law. And the fact that we practice a system of governance which recognizes constitutional supremacy does not derogate from it. Because the courts themselves have said that in a constitutional supremacy system of governance, they themselves are under the law. So they can't make it look like every other person is under the law except them. They are also under the law. And the law that they are required to respect says the doctrine of separation of powers is part of that law. And if we accept that, the political doctrine question is not up for any discussion at all. Secondly, I also take the view that the sui generis principle does not justify any conclusion that the political question doctrine doesn't apply. In short, I take the view that it applies, and the courts have consistently respected it, taking all the decisions that the main speaker has considered, and those that I've also repeated. The courts have always respected it, even without saying that that they are applying the doctrine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thaddeus. Sorry. And I have no idea how he managed to do what he just did, because he has a presentation of 44 pages. We are also live on Joy News. Thank you very much for carrying this Seminal lectures to every Ghanaian home, so to speak. Late Justice Anthony Yeboah, in his alchemy of social justice, writes about judicial self-restraint and judicial activism. And it will appear that the questions being raised here may border on those issues. And he summarizes in 2 questions. Is it proper to constitutionally empower the judiciary to overturn decisions of the political institutions or organs of the state, such as the legislature or executive, or by injunction to restrain them? 2, is it the proper function of the judiciary to change society through judicial lawmaking by adopting a construction unintended by the legislature, but necessary or desirable to solve a social, political, or economic problem? The jury is out there. Shall we now welcome for the second presentation by our second discussants, Clara, rising from her village in Mayoro, has been determined to inspire especially girls to believe that nothing is impossible. She graduated as the best all-round graduating law student and a recipient of the coveted John Mensah Saba Memorial Prize. At the time, she was not only a wife, but a mother. She's the first and only woman from the Upper East region to win that prize. She became the first woman from that region again to become a law lecturer, both at GIMPA and the University of Ghana Law Schools. She is one of Ghana's voices on matters of public interest and public.
So we hope that it will be continued. I also want to thank the keynote speaker, Professor Kofi Abuchi, for his presentation, which does an excellent review of the topic concerned, and as well as summarize concisely the Supreme Court decision in the Justice Abdullahi case. Given that I have only 15 minutes to share my thoughts, I am to be brief, and brief I will endeavor to be. Now, my presentation is basically, a lot has been said already. Most of the points has been made. What my presentation basically seeks to do is to consider a proposal, to make a proposal to the Supreme Court on managing the fine balance between its mandate under the 1992 Constitution while respecting the doctrine of separation of powers, the cornerstone of our democracy. It has been acknowledged in other democracies similar to ours that a failure to manage well this fine balance not only risk unnecessary clashes with the other branches of government, but that it could also affect the court's effort in building and maintaining its legitimacy by acting as a forum of principle and deciding every case on the basis of legal principles rather than political considerations. So Supreme Courts in democracies similar to ours have attempted and are still attempting methods to manage well this fine balance. And so must our Supreme Court, as noted by the speakers before me. My presentation is therefore my proposal, and I think our Supreme Court ought to manage this balance in the light of the specific provisions of our Constitution, the nature of its jurisdiction under our Constitution, and then in the light of the principles of democracy, so that we could further deepen our democracy. I also hope that my proposal could help to ignite debate from all of us as citizens for the consideration of the Supreme Court on the way forward for us. The reason is simple. In every democracy, even in, of course, we have three branches of government. We have the elected branches, and then we have the appointed branch, which is the Supreme Court. Both the executive and the legislature are elected branches. In every democracy, there's a realm for the elected branch and a realm for the judicial, the appointed branch, and an attempt to make sure that we keep all separate. But it is not surprising. Sometimes political issues are going to end up in court, because sometimes when the elected branches fight in the realm of politics, and either one loses because it's usually by majority, there is always a potential in some cases and an attempt to redo your case and seek to win using another means. Sometimes if you can do so through the Supreme Court, normally in every democracy, an attempt will be made. And it is the Supreme Court's duty to ensure that it does not become the forum for the fighting of political battles, but that in issues where the cases arise, it cannot shirk its responsibility. But it also must not become the forum for a second battle that must be fought within the political realm. To do this, the Supreme Court needs to manage a fine balance. So what I seek to do, as I noted, is to provide a proposal. And I do that because I am also an academic. And as an academic, I am interested not only in what the law is, but what the law should be. And although we usually do not acknowledge it as much, the whole idea and concept of rule of law is founded in academia. It came from theorizing and propositions that we seek to implement. So what I will seek to do is, from an academic background, make proposals to the Supreme Court on the way forward. And to do this, I want to give a brief background so that I give a context to my proposal. On the 28th of January 1992, the people of Ghana at a national referendum held throughout Ghana approved the 1992 Constitution for the administration of Ghana to come into force on 7th day of January 1993. So on 7th January 1993, the 1992 Constitution became at least two things, and it did at least three things. It became law, it became the supreme law of Ghana, it ushered in the Fourth Republic, it reaffirmed that sovereignty resides in the people, and it opted for democracy as a form of governance in Ghana, with limitation on all powers given, and the protection of human rights. This is the form of governance we chose, and we have continued to choose since 7th January 1993. It provides for three arms of government, as we already know: the executive, the legislature, the judiciary. It also has the fundamental principle that there be separation of powers between the various arms of government. In my view, the principle of separation of powers means that we should discourage the encroachment of one arm of state on the terrain of another. And there must be no bias in this regard. So while Parliament may not encroach on the terrain of the judiciary, so must the judiciary not encroach on the terrain of Parliament. The operation of this principle in a constitutional democracy such as ours must, however, always be considered in the light of protecting the democratic process, ensuring that there is no abuses of power by any of the arms of government. The limitation on all powers means that every institution, arm of government, or person who has been given power under this constitutional dispensation also has some limitation placed on that power. So the executive has a limitation, Parliament has a limitation, and the judiciary has a limitation on the power given it. Same applies to any other person who has been given power in the 1992 Constitution. So in the constitutional democracy that Ghana practices, and as secured by the 1992 Constitution, no arm of government is supreme. Rather, it is the Constitution that is supreme, and every other arm of government or person is subject to the Constitution, and sovereignty resides in no one but the people. The Constitution gives to each branch of government its mandate and a limitation on that mandate. For the smooth running of governance, it is expected that each branch would carry out its mandate and as well accord the other branches the due respect to them. In carrying out their mandate, it is the Supreme Court rather than the elected branches that must exercise final judicial power. In exercising this mandate, there will always be cases that are politically sensitive, including cases that may fall within the domain of the elected branches of government, political disputes as noted by the Keynote Speaker. What has engaged many democracies, including our own Supreme Court, is how the Constitutional Court can exercise its judicial power in such cases without usurping from elected officials what belongs to politics and policy, and for which they will answer for at the polls, not at the court. But it must. The Constitutional Court can exercise its judicial power in such cases without usurping from elected officials what belongs to politics and policy, and for which they will answer for at the polls, not at the court. But it must do so without shirking its own responsibility under the Constitution. So the court has been careful to not grab jurisdiction where it has not been given, but to also not decline jurisdiction where it has been given. It is in threading this fine balance that jurisdictions like the United States developed the doctrine of the political questions, while other democracies like South Africa opted for the judicial restraint principle. The keynote speaker, the speakers before me have eruditely discussed the doctrine of the political question, so I will not attempt to rediscuss this. There is also not sufficient time for me to discuss the judicial self-restraint doctrine, so I shall seek only to summarize it as applicable in this context. The judicial self-restraint doctrine is basically to the effect that the political sensitive nature of a dispute does not determine whether it is justiciable or not. Rather, the distinction must be drawn between the political and legal aspects of the disputes. Therefore, while a court is entitled to review the legality of a decision according to legal standards, it is not entitled to review the political wisdom of the decision. So, a court faced with a dispute that borders on political or policy matters must limit itself only to the issues of law that the dispute and resist the temptation to run commentary on the political wisdom or otherwise of actions taken therein by elected officials. The jurisdictions that have opted for the judicial self-restraint doctrine are jurisdictions which have a written constitution like ours, which, quite like ours, require that all acts that are inconsistent with the Constitution are liable to be declared void to the extent of the inconsistency by the Constitutional Court. These jurisdictions argue that in such cases, the political question doctrine cannot be applicable insofar as the dispute raises issues of whether or not the Constitution has been breached. There are some of the approaches the court has adopted in order to navigate. These are some of the approaches the court has adopted in order to navigate the fine balance of sticking to its mandate while not upsetting the fundamental cornerstone of democracy, which is the principle of separation of powers. Do these approaches necessarily apply in the light of the 1992 Constitution? How can the Ghanaian Supreme Court navigate this fine balance or thin rope? For us in Ghana, what should be the way forward after Justice Abdullahi and Attorney General? So to now my proposal. As a constitutional democracy that provides that every law, act, or omission is inconsistent with the Constitution is void to the extent of the inconsistency, and entitling anyone to bring an action in the Supreme Court for a declaration to that effect, the Supreme Court can decline jurisdiction on the ground of the political question doctrine only where the dispute does not raise issues bordering on a breach of the Constitution or inconsistency of the Constitution. That is one. Or where it does, and the court wants to decline jurisdiction, the issues that it raises must have expressly been taken from the Supreme Court and put within the remit of another branch of government. If they do not, the Supreme Court must proceed to determine same. An example of instances where the Constitution has expressly taken a matter from the Supreme Court and put it within the remit of another branch of government or another forum is Article 33, with respect to the enforcement of human rights, and Article 115, with respect to parliamentary proceedings. Where a matter is properly before the Supreme Court and is not remitted to another branch or forum, but raises questions bordering on the political doctrine question, the Supreme Court ought to determine same. However, with care to separate the legal aspects from the political aspects and determine same without giving undue political fodder to any of the parties or make comments or pronouncements that impugn the intentions and actions of other branches of government. The Supreme Court can do this successfully by developing rules to aid them draw a distinction between the political and legal aspects of the dispute and stick only to the legal aspects and protection of rights while leaving the political aspects to the elected branches. In conclusion, it is my view that it is the role of the Supreme Court to measure any act, law, or omission by any other arm of government against the Constitution when called upon to do so. And this is a duty the court cannot shirk, but a duty the court must nevertheless fulfill without upsetting the doctrine of separation of powers. The way for the court to do this is with reasoned consistency, so that the legitimacy or credibility of the court may not be called into question by the people whose justice it is that the court administers. To enable the court to do this, 1, it must decline jurisdiction on the ground of the political question doctrine only where the dispute does not raise issues bordering on its jurisdiction under Article 1(2), or if it does, such issues have been expressly taken from the Supreme Court and put within the remit of another branch of government. And 2, with care, the court must always endeavor to separate the legal aspects from the political aspects of a case and determine same without giving political advantage to any of the parties. And the court must not make comments or pronouncements that impugn the intentions and actions of the other branches of government. It is only fair so to do, because the other parties do not have an equal forum to respond to such commentary. The court thus must refrain from such commentary. And thirdly, the court must develop rules to aid them achieve the above 2 and apply such rules consistently. In doing so, the court is able to stay within the remit of law, maintain its legitimacy, and inspire confidence among the people in the fact that the court has no interest in any dispute before it, but its interest only is the law. God bless our homeland Ghana and make her great and strong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clara. And I didn't see her look at her time or anything, but she did exactly the 15 minutes that was allotted her. Thank you very much. As we began the program, I referred to Thomas Jefferson when he said that with the same views, the most honest men often form different conclusions. I suppose it's making meaning to you now if it did not initially. Our discussants coming up, and finally, so that we can hear from you as well, is Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. He is founding executive director of the Institute for Democratic Governance, without a doubt, one of the leading think tanks in Ghana. His PhD is in comparative politics and international development, and was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Stockholm. As executive director of IDEC, he has steered the Institute's growth into one of Ghana's foremost think tanks in civil society that offers cutting-edge analysis of public policies and as well as advice and innovative solutions to governance interface and capacity gaps in state civil society relations. IDEC certainly has become the lead civil society advocate for the establishment of a devolved multi-party local government system in Ghana. They have undertaken many initiatives that have held our nation together. He has been recognized, including as the Millennium Excellence Award for Democratic Development in Ghana 2010, Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Peace and Social Justice in Ghana 2015, is a member of the Eminent Persons Group of the Commonwealth and the Ministerial Advisory Board of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration 2017 to 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Emmanuel Akwete.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nana Chair, or Maihin Chair, the Right Honorable Speaker, please, with all courtesies, all protocols observed, the 50 minutes our chair here spoke about, MC, is indirectly telling me I should be within time. You saw how he said, the speaker before me didn't even look at her time and she was within time. So I'm going to do my best. We've heard a lot about the political question, doctrine, and how it's been interpreted and applied. And I think we've heard a lot from the lawyers as they have failed and they've spoken eloquently. So the question is, after this, what? As we speak here, we have people throughout the country listening to us. It is a time that many are calling for change. Many have expectations of their MPs, whether they will put food and health and all that on the table. So we ought to look at the implications of this decision on the capacity of Parliament to do the work that will bring this together. Initially, I was going to talk about what I call managing majoritarian politics in a hung Parliament. The interpretations given by the Supreme Court and what my colleagues have spoken about, we all mentioned Parliament. But the Parliament of today is not the Parliament we knew 28 years ago. It is a different Parliament. It's called the hung Parliament. And much as we might think that it's a fluke, it is possible it has come to stay. Because those who made the decision to have this Parliament, in spite of cases in court not decided of what, are the sovereign electorate. And in that case, I think it's always important that they have communicated. And one thing we don't do in Ghana, but which is done in all democracies have been where, whether it's results of election or not, is they ask the question, what is the electorate saying by this vote? We do not interpret the electorate's message in elections. It's who won, this group won, that group won, and so on. But sometimes it's also important to step back and ask those who have the power to choose you or choose others or create Parliament, what did they mean? What do they want? And as we've entered this phase of hung Parliament, it's important to see that, to understand that this is not peculiar to Ghana. As I think one of the speakers said earlier, in the Westminster Parliament, they hung. They are split in the middle, or they don't have enough number. No party has enough number to be the majority, and they have to come together. So in those parliaments, they talk a lot about which parties can work together. Sometimes ideology doesn't matter, left and right doesn't matter, they will come together. Finland is a typical place where socialists and capitalists come together to work. Is it just for this realize and come to the notion that the hung Parliament we have, is it just for this mandate period, or is it likely to come? And if it does, how do we handle it? I think it has thrown a fundamental challenge about how a Parliament that has functioned for close to 30 years as a majoritarian Parliament now overnight is standing orders, is decisions on which of the deputy speakers should vote and so on, how decisions are made, this relationship with parties outside Parliament and all that. It has posed questions on all those. And the conversation tend not to go to this at all, but I think it's the fundamental issue. So what I thought I should put out is that the interpretation I see, and which we did a paper on, it was published earlier before Christmas, talks about a Parliament that cannot be run by we have the numbers, and therefore you might have your talk, but we would have our way. So boycotting Parliament decisions has been one of the things we all know about. But we do not know of a situation where, like e-levy, we could wake up and say, oh, actually, the original proposal didn't go through. The opposition said, no, you won't get the votes, and therefore you can't pass it. So we sat down all night, and we spoke about this over 2 weeks, and this is what we got, and so now we're in Parliament to vote. Deliberation, consensus building comes before you go to the floor, because you know you wouldn't get the number, and it is disaster. So the question is, can we assume this will take place in our Parliament automatically? And we think that we are faced with a very significant challenge. We couldn't do this, but we saw the boycotts, both majority and minority sides, with the one vote difference. And then certain actions took place, and we ended up in a disaster. I was told at one time a bipartisan committee had been formed in Parliament. I think they call it, is it a committee of 20 or something? Of what? Well, okay, but you form a committee after the fight. And I asked, what is this committee about? I was told that it's to prevent the fight recurring. But I thought they were going to negotiate. The bill on the table had caused the uproar. No. Then what we saw was that they all went out speaking on radio and so on. But Parliament is the prime forum for conversations, debate, deliberations, whatever. And you have all the facilities. But they abandoned Parliament and they were on the radio. I'm just telling you observations we've made. But the hung Parliament situation could recur. Can we handle it in this Parliament as designed and as it has operated for the last 30 years or close to 30 years? The issue that bothers us at IDEG is that all the behaviors we've seen so far, including the interpretation the Supreme Court has made, does not address the fundamental question that the voters now say, at least for this 4 years, work together to give us what we want. That is the interpretation. Do you have the systems in place for that to happen? And we're trying to deal with real power issues with a strong culture of majoritarianism. And I'll give you an example. When the budget was, the E-levy proposal was put out, the Honorable Minority Leader, I heard everybody talked about, but he first made a statement on how he would want it reduced, what level it should go. The government side, or the Minister of Finance, or issued a statement rejecting that. And that alone tells you that they thought they were in the majoritarian context. But it wasn't at all. In hung parliaments that you see in countries in Europe, particularly the parliamentary ones, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, even Germany, you know, it took them time to form their government. You cannot move when your opponent or the party whose votes you need to pass this says no. Instead, of course, it was part of us also urging that the people of Ghana be informed and educated on this, how it's going to impact on their life and so on and so. And that took precedence of everything. So Parliament really did not come together to, I don't know whether you did that so that the new rate is based on your bilateral discussions and negotiations, but it's a majoritarian decision when you do not have the power. So if we are not careful to think about the reforms that must take place, beginning with the standing orders, which we shaped because nobody anticipated this kind of parliament, but this kind of parliament could stay for a long time. So there is some work to be done there, and I think it had come up in the earlier conversations. The second point then is the consequence of the Supreme Court interpretation. Deputy speakers could vote because they represent constituencies, and in this particular case too, you had to factor in, wow, if I don't vote and my party loses, what happens to me? In a kind of a situation where politics could be quite threatening because somebody didn't understand this decision you took. And I think what we've done is to say that if two of the deputies speakers would vote, What about contested many elections, but not this one? He is the speaker, and the Constitution says he doesn't vote as part of your own or standing orders. He doesn't vote. But what are the implications of now saying the two deputy speakers would vote? Should he remain without a vote? How would that go in this same hung parliament situation? Context has changed. It is a matter to be taken seriously. What we did was to look around and see what happens in other countries. We just wanted to know how many speakers face such situations. We looked at a few countries. I'll go through quickly. Okay, sir. It says 5 minutes. Okay. Botswana, to be speaker, an MP can be elected or someone chosen from outside the House of Parliament, but I didn't get the full information. Canada, the speaker is a sitting MP. The speaker cannot vote unless there is a tie. That's the casting vote. And the actions of the speaker can only be criticized by way of motion, but be put before the House, not in a public debate. Then 3, debate on decisions of the speaker is prohibited. This is Canada. United States. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is a member of the House and entitled to debate and vote. In the Senate, the Vice President is the presiding officer who has an ex officio vote. In Uganda, the Speaker must be elected from among the sitting MPs. The presiding officer, both Speaker and deputies, have no original or casting vote. So probably this is one of the models where nobody with a speaker, deputy also votes. But that's Uganda. You have to look at democracies too and how they function. United Kingdom, the speaker must break all ties with his or a political party while in office to preserve impartiality. The speaker seeks re-election on a non-party ticket as the speaker seeking re-election. So when he is contesting re-election, nobody else challenges the speaker. The speaker does not participate in debate and only has a casting vote, so he votes. Same applies to deputies. The speaker must be selected from sitting MPs. The speaker generally votes for the status quo during a tie break on the convention. That changes in the status quo should have a majority in the House. Let me take the final one, South Africa. The speaker is chosen from among the members of the assembly at its first sitting, following a general election and whenever the office is vacant. Speaker does not vote, nor does the deputies. So we have this situation where we've been told deputies can vote, but we do not know whether the speaker could also vote. It's a matter to be resolved. It could have far-reaching consequences, but there are lessons to guide us. You said I have 10 minutes more? Okay. Okay. I think it's fair to wrap up here so that you will also have your say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. And this is the Speaker's Seminal Lecture Series, the very first of the series under the theme Parliament, Its Business, and the Supreme Court in Perspective. And as Dr. Akwete spoke, I was thinking about what the media is beginning to report today after the arguments following the Abdullahi decision that says you need to preserve the deputy speaker's constituency. He doesn't have to lose that constituency. So questions are being asked. The novel situation where, quote unquote, an MP has been injuncted, and the decision of the court was that the injunction will happen so that there will be a quick trial. So you hear the reports today that the case has been adjourned, and the media is asking, after almost a month or so, where is the quick trial? I think those are legitimate questions. Dr. Akwete's organization was involved in the design of the Chief Justice's Forum, and I was very privileged to be the consultant in one of them for the 2015. And I took a look at the Kenyan Constitution 2010, Article 140 or so, which provided that if there is an election petition, it must be filed within 7 days after the election, and the petition must be heard within 14 days. So they had an election petition heard within 14 days. But my assessment was that the process was rushed. And so I did propose that we should do 80 days for some very good reasons, so that we depart from the 2012 situation where we're almost heading to a whole 1 year. We just made proposals. The proposals were looked at, and then eventually we discovered that the court felt it could do it within 40 days. And we did the 40 days in the recent petition, and issues have come up. So if the court is interested in speed, the question now is, where is the speed and why not? Ladies and gentlemen, your contributions are welcome, and thanks very much for your patience. We are taking 4 questions or contributions. Our guest speaker and discussants are here. They will answer your questions. So 4 first, and then we'll do a next round of 4. Interesting. Okay, I was going to ask that the notable people should, as it were, allow the ordinary bench. So let's begin with the General Secretary of the NDC, and then the man in yellow. Right. So we can take the 2 first, and the next 2. Discretion, Speaker. You see, the Speaker doesn't see so many people sometimes. Yes.
Thank you very much. I have 1 contribution and 1 question. Dr. Akwete spoke about how we should learn to live with the hung parliament because it has come to stay. I think that I didn't conclude the statement because in a situation where you have presidential elections separate from parliamentary elections, there may be 3 scenarios in parliament. He just spoke about only 2, majoritarian and hung. But there is another possibility where you have parliament being controlled absolutely by the party that is not in charge of the executive. So as we learn how to live with hung parliament, we must anticipate that scenario too, so that when we're crafting the new standing orders, we take this into account. Now my question. We spoke about a hung parliament, and yet, for some reason, we are talking about majority and minority in a hung parliament. How did it happen? It happened because on one occasion, we decided to count an independent member of parliament among the members of one party, and concluded that that was majority. The same constitution says that the 2 deputy speakers should not come from the same party. So at the point of electing the deputy speaker, we concluded that, well, because he's independent, we are not breaching the constitution. Now, immediately after the election, we are talking about majority because the independent had been added to one party. How can we break this type of confusion?
All right.
Do we have a situation where we have majority in Ghana's parliament now, or we don't?
All right, thank you. Please, to the man in the yellow Shetin. Yes.
My name is Raphael Kofi Ahalegan. Yeah, my question direct goes to how judgment was given in Techiman case.
Please speak up a bit.
Hello, yeah. Techiman case where the MP there was told that people voted for him and therefore he could go to parliament. Another one from Ase. You people voted for you, so you can also go to parliament. Understand that law? Can you explain that this is to me?
All right. At the back, I'm looking for a lady. Okay. Well, please, those whose hands are up, which lady's hand is up? Okay, please. So let's hear, yes, third question or contribution.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Please, I'm Honorable Lydia Lamisia Kamvarwa from Timpani constituency. During the presentation, Professor Abuchi made a statement. He said that the case of Abdullah was properly decided. I want to know, looking at J.H. Mensah and Attorney General, Tufo and Attorney General, I want to find out, do you want to say that it was decided on the issue of a political question, or it was correctly decided because it is said that the Deputy Speaker can vote because he represents a constituency? Thank you so much.
Lamisi, right?
Yes.
Seeking clarity. We'll take our final question or contribution. This hand has been up for a very long time.
Thank you very much. My name is Dominic Akuriting Ayine, MP for Bolga East constituency. Just to say a very big thank you to Professor Abuchi for a very erudite lecture and to the discussants. My very good friend Teddy Osori diplomatically ended his presentation, falling short of saying that Abdullah is bad law. That is Abdullah and Attorney General is bad law. Now, I have had occasion publicly to say that that decision was a solution looking for a problem to solve. And thankfully, I think Lydia has asked my first question, which is, in light of Abdullah, is Tufo and Attorney General still good law? So that is to the lawyers on the platform. My second question is it constitutionally prudent for the Supreme Court to pry into Parliament to the extent of overruling the rulings of Mr. Speaker?
Okay.
Those are my two questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The first, let's take the last question first, which is a legal question directly to Dr. Professor Abuchi from Dominic Ayine. Dr. Dominic Ayine. Yes, the very last question from him. And it sort of dovetails into the question by Zilamisi, how is Abdullah correct in terms of the political question doctrine?
Okay. So thank you, Honorable Dominic Ayine. And thank you all for the question. I think the correctness or otherwise of Abdullah should be limited to the context of this lecture. It is not a discussion in the abstract. So I am not going to contest your special reservations on Abdullah, but my position on the correctness of Abdullah lies with it upholding the decision in 2-4. So here's how Abdullah reconciles it to 4. In 2-4, the court said that Parliament is a master of its business. In Abdullah, the judgment of the court said an objection on grounds of the political questions doctrine will first have to be decided by the court. I mentioned earlier the decision in Kwachi and Attorney General, in which the court indicated in a similar objection by stating that any such objection will have to provide a factual scenario and the court, or a factual basis, and the court has to determine the factual basis. So it appears that Abdullah actually repeated or combined 2-4 and Kwachi, 2-4 saying that we will not interfere in Parliament except it's something affecting the Constitution. Kwachi saying that if you make an objection, you have to provide a factual basis, and the court still has to decide that. And then in Abdullah, the court said, if you make an objection, we'll first have to decide whether indeed you have a basis for your objection. So I am limiting the correctness of Abdullah to the extent that it did not blanketly say, as far as my reading goes, that the political doctrine question is just simply inapplicable. My understanding of the case is that the court actually said, we first have to assess whether or not the basis of your objection is sustainable. And so it's on that basis that I think that Abdullah really has not overruled the previous decisions. My only concern, and I indicated that in the conclusion of my lecture, that I still would prefer the court giving us a basis for its determination, assuming that it's going to uphold an objection or refuse it. It doesn't seem the court went that further step to tell us that. And so things pretty much still lie in the remit of the court. And
the question from Raphael, I think we can have Thaddeus Sori respond to that. He's asking, he wants to understand, as many people have questioned, why injunct one MP whilst restraining from injuncting other MPs who also have matters pending before the court?
Well, thank you for the question, but the answer, so far as I'm concerned, is a little straightforward.
If you may please speak up a bit for us.
The answer to this is straightforward but a little complicated. The reason is because the facts in each of these circumstances are different. If you go to the Volta region and the one in Techiman, they are different. They will also be 4 different courts altogether. The one in the Supreme Court raised issues that the court thought was constitutional, and that there was even a preliminary finding by the High Court that the parliamentarian was illegally occupying office. Those were the findings. I'm not saying whether they were correct or wrong. But the truth of the matter is that because they presented different scenarios, you can't expect the same conclusion. The factual issues there and then the legal issues there are different in each of the scenarios, so you don't expect the same answer to the question as to whether or not an injunction would be issued rightly or wrongly in every situation.
People are looking for a certain standard, and they expect the standard to be the same. Is that applicable in law? When I got here,
yes,
somebody approached me and said that he said me say before that before the 2016 election, Kwesi Mintim, there was a situation, and I represented somebody. We did the case, a parliamentary election matter. We did the case within 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. A judge decided that the case must finish quick so that the person doesn't miss the nomination of the EC, filing and contesting the elections. And it was done within 2 weeks. The person was asking, how come even at the Supreme Court, they said we are injuncting this man so that we will hear expeditiously, and we are getting into a month, and how many adjournments so far?
But Samson, we are dealing with the Supreme Court and we are dealing with the High Court. The Supreme Court is not bound by the standards set by the High Court. And so, and you'd also bear with me that in the Supreme Court, the matter has raised different questions. The question as to even whether the Supreme Court has jurisdiction or not to entertain the matter is still before the court for determination. So the factual situations are a little different. The High Court has emphatically pronounced on the fate of the man in the High Court. The Supreme Court says we are literally continuing what the High Court is doing. But in your case, you are still before the High Court. Maybe if yours too had gone to the Supreme Court, you would have gotten the same result. We don't know.
All right. Maybe Clara may want to speak to that question too as well. There's one question from General Esiedun Ketia. He says majority and minority in an equally split parliament. That goes to Dr. Akwete. But Clara, what would you say about Raphael's question? They are expecting same standards.
With respect to the expectation of same standard, it's a legitimate expectation. The reason is that although by our law, the Supreme Court is not bound by its previous decisions, but the Supreme Court has a responsibility to maintain a certain standard in the eyes of the people. And then any time that the Supreme Court is going out of that standard, it explains why. So although the Constitution gives the Supreme Court certain powers, there is also what Professor Abuchi referred to earlier on as the unseen constitution, which is that as judges, you always know that it is the people's justice that you administer, and the people have certain expectations. So you have to meet certain expectations so that the people continue to see that all that the Supreme Court or the courts are interested in is the law. They have no other interest. So that expectation is legitimate. That said, as it has been said, it's a little bit difficult to sit as I sit here and say that this decision was right and this decision was wrong and that this decision was right without having to do a comprehensive review of all the cases. In terms of injunctions, there are certain expectations of injunctions. As a legal practitioner, I have a position on when an injunction should apply and when an injunction should not apply. But I don't want to substitute that opinion for what has happened so far. So in short, just to add to what Mr. Sori has said, it really depends on the facts of each case. But apart from the facts of each case, the principles must hold. If you ask me whether an NP should be injuncted from sitting before a case is determined, I would have to measure that by the standards for injunction, which is that can an irreparable harm be done? If the person wins, for example, can they go back and vote in all the matters that they didn't vote for? I think that the question is obvious. So I can't say the decisions were wrong because they were not all given by the same court. I don't think all of those were by the Supreme Court. So it's difficult to say that the court said this here and that there.
All right. Dr. Akwete, Raphael's question, not Raphael, Mr. Siedun Ketia's question.
Yeah.
How do you talk about majority-minority in an equally split parliament?
In a situation where another party could be in charge, but not the governing party. That's what you meant, the third. You see, when you do not, in parliamentary system, when you do not get the numbers, because there's what we call the magic number, the number of seats you should have, you have to get other parties, even if it's one person. And so once the coalition is formed, you can't describe any single party as majority. They will tell you members of the coalition, but there's the largest. Okay, they use words like largest because maybe they have 35 seats or 100 seats, others have 10, and so on. So this majoritarian, but I thank you for the question because that's the point I'm making. We have to take the situation with the hung parliament seriously. It has its own structure, it has its own philosophy, principles, methods. We just took it that, this is something that goes like this. You know, it's not the normal thing, but it has deeper meaning. It's the electorate that decided. So you have to take it seriously. And in that way, you find out that there is the need to really look at what needs to be reformed. And in that case, if one day you are in majority, absolutely, you say I'm a majority party because you knocked out the small parties here like you did. You know, there were small parties in, and then the two of you eventually took all the seats.
All right.
So there you have it. So if more than two, the terms change.
Thank you once again for your patience. The last round of 4 questions. Last set of questions. I'm looking to see. Yes, there's a lady. There's a hand of a lady out there. Please attend to the lady first. I'm overruling Speaker. The question he asked, should the court be overruling the Speaker? Yes, please ask your question. I'll make sure they answer that too. Please, your name first.
Vivian Thibault.
Vivian.
Yes, please. I am a pensioner. I've worked in the civil service for 42 years. And my question goes to Dr. Akwete. I overheard that he had won a prize on social justice. But I'm wondering whether there is social justice in Ghana. Because this is not concerning the parliamentary session we are doing. I am asking my own question. The Hausa Reserve. I hope you know the Hausa Reserve. Do you know the Hausa Reserve? Achimota Forest. It was given in 1894 by my grandfather. Hausa Cantonment. 1897. Survey School. 1896. And then from the cemetery to the runabout also was given in 18 something. I've forgotten it. And then the mercantile companies on the Dodowa Road from the runabout to Sankara, that's where you call the Independence Avenue. All these were given by G.B. Thibault. And Land Commission has struck our name. In 2011, we went on demonstration, and they made an arson in the Land Commission, burning old documents.
Okay.
Dr. Akwete, I learned you were given an award on social justice.
Okay.
So I'm challenging you.
Thank you very much, Vivian. Let's hear from other people.
Take up the matter.
Thank you very much. So Vivian is simply asking, is there social justice relative to Achimota Forest Reserve lands? Please, over there. Please keep your hand up so that he brings the microphone to you. Then there will be two more. The speaker's job must be a very difficult one.
Please, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Mariam, a national service personnel from Parliament. Please, during Mrs. Claret's presentation, you made mention of the three arms of government having their limitation. So I want to know if there is a mechanism that sticks to it that they are not abusing the powers that has been invested in them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariam. And so, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, please. There's a lady here. After she's done, the gentleman at the back in a jacket and white shirt. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Samson. I heard...
Please, your name.
My name is Uwera Ibrahima, Member of Parliament for Salaga South Constituency. Okay. I heard our keynote speaker, Professor Abuchi, conclude with a very poignant quote. And he said that the judiciary is the least scary of the three arms of, the least dangerous, that's the exact word, of the three arms of government because they operate within the law. I want to ask within that context that in Abdullah, I think Abdullah went to court, to the Supreme Court, seeking interpretation on some constitutional provisions. One was Article 102 of the Constitution, which states the issue of quorum in Parliament, and which I could just paraphrase to say that there will be a quorum, a speaker in the chair, a deputy speaker when the speaker is not available, and that deputy speaker would not form part of the quorum as he sits in the chair. It's Article 102 in the Constitution. Article 104 talked about decision making in Parliament and where there should be at least half of Parliament. In our current situation where we have 275, half could be 137.5 or 138. If you look at the Abdullahi ruling, therefore, where the Supreme Court said that the speaker, the deputy speaker who sits in the chair, when the right honorable speaker is absent, is entitled to vote. If the deputy speaker doesn't form part of the quorum of Parliament, how does he vote?
Okay.
Did that ruling, therefore, go contrary to the letter and spirit of the Constitution? In which case, we have to begin to be more wary of the Supreme Court than the other arms of government.
All right, thank you. Please, the last questioner is over there. The last questioner is over there. That's the last questioner. His hand is up. Keep your hand up. Please keep your hand up. Thank you very much for your patience, but this is where we can end it. We didn't start exactly on time. Yes.
Thank you very much. I am in the person of Salvius Benny. And then
Sorry, the name again?
Salvius Benny. I want to know, hinging my question on the decision in Tufo and Attorney General, if Parliament is no longer a master of its own rules, because I understand the submission by Professor Abuchi that it is only when there are constitutional breaches that the Supreme Court comes in. And so where there are no constitutional breaches and then we still have the Supreme Court meddling in the affairs of Parliament, is Parliament therefore no longer a master of its own rules? I want to know.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, the first, Vivian was asking Dr. Kwete if there is social justice. If you can respond to that in a minute, we'll be glad about that. But before that, Dr. Dominic Ayene's question was outstanding. Should the court be overruling the speaker? That's the general question he asked to Professor Abuchi. Okay. Professor Abuchi, that question was to you. So let Professor Abuchi,
okay.
Yes, clear up that.
The truth of the matter is that in all matters involving politics, there's always heat, anger, and frustration. So trying to keep things on the principled path, just look at the principles. The principles are that whether Parliament decided to raise hands or just voice notes, or whatever it is Parliament decided to go by, the court can't investigate. But the court will investigate decisions, and so decisions are the concretization of the proceedings. So if we follow that principle, what it means is that proceedings in Parliament in terms of how the Speaker identifies who speaks, you are struggling with that, in terms of how the Speaker identifies who speaks, in terms of internal arrangements in Parliament, by the principle, the court has no business in that area. But by that principle, when all that together concretizes into a decision, the reason by the decisions the court has jurisdiction over these is that they will be benchmarked against the Constitution.
All right.
So that once it is ascertained that those decisions have constitutional infractions, then the court can come in. So to the answer, the court cannot interfere in proceedings within Parliament, but the court can question the ultimate decision.
All right, thank you. Dr. Kwete, is there social justice?
You know, I'm sitting with lawyers, so I thought...
no, you are the recipient of the Social Justice Award. She was clear about that.
I think the land issues also have not only social justice component. If you've lost your land and you don't have a place to stay, or your family has been, it's a matter that advocacy could go on to that, give it the highlight it needs so that people would speak about it and get justice. But in this matter, you didn't conclude. You see, you are forcing me to be a lawyer. You didn't conclude whether your land has been taken away from you. You mentioned lands commission, but that was all. So maybe, I thought the lawyers, they're always dealing with land cases. And you have formidable lawyers here, including, Dr. Yini is here. I would point you to them. If you come and see me, I'll take you to Dr. Yini.
All right.
He's very kind.
The question to Clara from Mariam is direct. In respect of the three arms of government and their functions, are there effective checks to avoid abuse?
To a large extent, yes, but there are always gray areas. Why do I say to a large extent, yes? Because if you look at the design of democracy, we give to the executive power, we give to the legislature power, then we have the judiciary that is there so that any time that this power is used out of bounds, a citizen has the right to go to the court for a declaration to that effect. And once it happens, the person must comply, whether it's the executive arm of government or it is the judicial arm of government. So that is an effective check. The human rights jurisdiction of the court and the fact that we have a written constitution where every act, whether by executive or legislature, can be measured against a certain benchmark. To that extent, there is effective limitation of powers. Where there is not that much usual is the question that comes and the discussion around the tyranny of the judiciary. Because we do have the judiciary that is here that can check on the other branches to find out whether they are exercising their powers within the bounds given them or not. The question always comes back, when it is the judiciary that has exceeded its powers, who calls the judiciary into question? So that debate is still there. So yes, we haven't figured out a way. The best way in the democracy usually is for the people to now at least hold that branch accountable. So we do have effective limitations, but a lot more in terms of jurisdiction and practice and culture needs to make it a totality.
All right. Madam Brab, the MP's question is also directed at Ms. Abuchi, Professor Abuchi, but I don't know if Thaddeus heard Benin's question, the very last questioner. Benin, I was taking notes of her questioning, so I don't even remember yours. Can you ask it again? Yes. Do you remember his question? Yes, ask it again, quick. Okay, is Parliament still a master of its own rules if the Supreme Court will have to dictate what happens?
All the decisions that we've gone through in this discussion affirm that Parliament is a master of its own rules. Justice Abdullahi affirmed it several times before it reached the conclusion that the political question doctrine doesn't apply, and that was one of the points that I took against that decision. What Justice Abdullahi did was that he said it was invited into the dispute because different positions were taken between the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker on a particular position. And to the extent that there is that difference, it must then resolve it by determining the legal question on which they differed. That was what Justice Abdullahi said. But it reaffirmed that position that was taken in Tufuo and even J.H. Mensah. Okay. And in all of them, they determined the preliminary question whether it was appropriate to get into the matter or not.
All right, thank you. Professor Abuchi, you take the last one. On the basis of your presentation and which is the most dangerous or not, she comes to the conclusion on the basis of the interpretation that they have given in this matter, whether or not we should be wary of the Supreme Court.
I don't think we've gotten to that point where we should be worried yet. I don't think we should be worried. Now, the reason I say this is this. The Alexander Bickel's statement on the least dangerous branch is premised on the fact that the executive has political incentives to misbehave. The legislature has political incentives to misbehave. Throughout history, The judiciary, on the other hand, have been comprised over the years by professionals, and that's why they are there from government to government, and they are supposed to administer the law, and therefore, on the basis of legal principle, the judiciary are not supposed to have political incentive to misbehave. So remember, now, ideally, now it's important, please, it's important for us to remember that if you look at the expression, he didn't say the judiciary is not dangerous. The expression says it is the least dangerous. What it means is that if you order the organs of government, legislatures and executives are more dangerous, and judiciaries are lesser dangerous, in that order. That's what it means. But it's a constitutional principle to simply tell us this, that judiciaries by nature are defenders of the law. And because they are defenders of the law, in the scheme of the rule of law, they are the least dangerous.
Thank you. Please, shall we give a round of applause to ourselves? Can we get the microphone to Nana Chairman so that he will give his closing remarks, I suppose, from where he is. He doesn't have to move up and down. Thank you all very much. Nana Chairman, shall we have your closing remarks? Okay. We'll hear from our host briefly before Nana Chairman.
Thank you so much. I must say that even though it's not for me to give the vote of thanks, I think I'm very grateful for what has transpired so far. The speakers have done a good job, and really the participants have even done a better job. And so I want you to applaud your efforts. But we are on the path to rectifying the wrongs of the past. And that is why we're trying to create this platform for us to share ideas. The courts are established to dispense justice, not just to settle disputes. Those justice must be based on evidence. I didn't hear any of you consider the issue, how come Parliament was not involved in the search for evidence to arrive at those decisions that the court took. Parliament was not aware of Justice Abdullahi versus Attorney General at all. We had no knowledge of it. And so even in the judgment, the judge, the lead judge, Justice Kulendi, said things that were not true of what happened in Parliament. The statement that the Speaker did not handle the Minister of Finance well was that which occasioned the majority to walk out. It's not borne by facts or evidence. There's nothing like that. The Speaker simply said non-MP ministers should lead the chamber. The question I'm going to put again will be a voice vote. And non-MP ministers, by law, are not to participate in the decision taking of the House. I never talked about Minister of Finance. But in the judgment, it found expression there. Again, there was an imputation about bias of a speaker in the judgment. If Parliament had been given the opportunity to be heard, they would not have been misled in some of these things. That is one. There were 3 cases before the Supreme Court on the same matter. One was by Richie Sky, and one was by another gentleman by name Suleiman Adamu Sanido versus the Attorney General and the Clerk of Parliament. That was the only one we were aware of. Suleiman Adamu Sanido versus the Attorney General and the Clerk of Parliament. because the clerk of parliament was served. And so the Attorney General in this matter was considered as our counsel. And we gave instructions to the Attorney General on that particular case, which was not heard at all. And it did not find expression in the Supreme Court. Richard Sky case, you know what happened, they said it was moot because of Abdullahi versus the Attorney General, which the Parliament had no knowledge about. And Justice Abdullahi is not a member of Parliament. He's not worked in Parliament before. And so it is not Parliament that took the case to the Supreme Court. It was not a dispute between me and my deputy that took the case to the Supreme Court, which is being settled by the Supreme Court. And so that is, according to my good friend, Professor Kwesi Asare, a.k.a. Azan. He says that Sal is the cardinal sin of the 8th Parliament. But this Justice Abdullah versus Attorney General is the cardinal sin of the judiciary. I hold strong view on that. I read the whole thing. Very simple, clear language was used by Justice Kulendi. And so very easy to understand. But there were some of these things that I thought as a court that is meant to dispense justice, they should have at least invited Parliament to hear our side of the story. It did not happen. The US, they use the Polka question doctrine because their jurisprudence is based on the statement that the law is in the bosom of the judge. And because the judge were trying to use that tyrannically, they had to find ways and means out. That is not the case in the UK jurisprudence. In the UK jurisprudence, the law is the law is the law.
Okay.
And so you have these things that are, and then we have to look at it together. Well, what we now have to do, as I stated, is a judgment of the Supreme Court. We are bound by it. We've been directed to go and look at our standing orders. We are looking at the standing orders. What is the way forward for us? How do we resolve this? But this parliament is very, very different from the other parliament. We must stress that for Ghanaians to understand. Okay. And because we are still using the old rules and the old culture, majoritarianism, we'll definitely be having these challenges until we are able to change the rules and also our own culture of governance.
All right.
So we'll be having these challenges. And so I want to plead with Ghanaians to at least have some more time to allow us to go through this process. And I'm sure this year we'll be able to go through many of them, and they will see a better system of governance in the country than we are having now. I thank you so much for the
opportunity. Thank you very much.
Standing on all the protocols that, that have been made, it's been quite, I wouldn't say rewarding sitting here, but I got more confused, more worried, and the task ahead is not easy. There's a whole lot of elitism that was shown, and I was just wondering, these discussions, how does the average man or woman in the street understand it? When the speaker himself opened the whole thing, I was just, and listening to this, all the speakers, we have a problem in Africa, and that's the problem of conceptual incarceration. What have I got to do with the imagination of Locke and Rousseau and the state of nature theorists? My people never lived in the state of the nature they had. So why should I go and take my law from those roots? And my 3 arms of government from those roots? Why should I go and imitate? As one of my friends told me, you keep on imitating. The monkey kept on imitating, and then one day he put a knife to his throat. Are we going that way? So this, and chasing around the world that this one said this. What do we have here? There is Oromo democracy, which is now being written. Go and read it. There's native colonialism, written by Ethiopians. Go into Rattray and then see how he describes democracy in Asante. Have we defined democracy? Or are we still going on with this blah, 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 there's a terror. So we need to look at our electoral systems now, and the violence and the money giving and so on and so forth. We need to get to the real of what we are and go within and bring out the genius that is the Ghanaian. If we don't do that, believe you me, we'll keep on imitating. Let me end with just one story from East Africa about the law. There was a man called Wayaki Wahenga. I'm sure you've heard of him. Wayaki gave Lugard, when he was a captain, a piece of land because he requested and said, stay here, and would then trade and so on. So Lugard stayed there, not that he just stayed there. In order for them to keep the rules, the regulations, they drank the blood oath. To an African, that is the highest of all oaths. They stayed there for a while, then they started breaking the rules. The British started breaking the rules. So Lugard, he complained, a Kikuyu chief. After complaints, it led to a fight. They had the arms, the rule of law. They caught Aki put in the Presbyterian church whilst he was bleeding, and in the morning they took him to a court of competent jurisdiction. In the British court, they sentenced Aki to death. What has he done? Now, in order to kill him, they dug a hole in the ground. The Kikuyu believe that Ngai, God, lives on Mount Kenya. So when you die, like Wayaki, you stand in the hole and face God. The wise British dug a hole, all right, turned Wayaki upside down and turned his face away from Mount Kenya. That is the rule of law that you copy. Would you pick up that law and inflict it on your people? Let's be clear. Let us go within. There is the Talansi people. Go and learn their democracy. Go to Asante, learn their democracy. Come to Hunter, learn our democracy. We can't keep on multiplying a basis based on conceptual incarceration. Let's liberate our minds from mental slavery. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for dragging me all the way from a schedule to be here. But it's quite an honor. You've multiplied my problems, but the thoughts will still go on. We need to build this country. And one thing that I like about the 30 years, and I hope all of you recognize it, is the 30 years of peace. That is what we need to maintain. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Please do it well for Nana Chairman, Nana Kobna Inketia, the 5th Omahini of the Esikado traditional area. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you so very much for your patience. We would like to thank our host, the Right Honorable Speaker, the Clerk to Parliament, Cyril Kwabena Insia, the speakers, our distinguished speakers, I mean. That includes the discussants, the planning committee, chaired by Richard Echampong. Want to say thank you.